Stay tuned for more reports of The Eyes Have It. For more information, visit our website at www.ttparliament.org and follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram.
The Honourable, the Speaker.
Almighty God, we give thanks to you, the Creator of the universe, and humbly beseech you to direct and prosper the deliberations of the members of this House here assembled for the advancement of your glory and the trust and welfare of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Grant that peace and happiness, truth and justice may be established among us for all generations. Amen. Amen. Namaste.
Oath or affirmation, announcements by the Speaker.
Honorable members, Dr. Suraj Ratan Rambacham, MP, member for Tabakeet, Ms. Marlene McDonald, MP, member for Port of Spain South, and Dr. Buhintradat Tuwari, MP, member for Caroni Central, have asked to be excused from today's sitting of the House. The leave which the members seek is granted.
Bills brought from the Senate, petitions, papers.
Leader of the House.
Thank you very kindly, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I have the honor to lay the following papers. Paper number 1, the ministerial response of the Ministry of Trade and Industry to the 4th report of the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee on an examination of the system of internal audit within the public service. Paper number 2, the ministerial response of the Ministry of Public Administration and Communications to the 4th report of the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee on an examination of the system of internal audit within the public service. Paper number 3, the response of the statutory authorities service commissions to the 4th report of the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee on an examination of the system of internal audit within the public service. Paper number 5, the second ministerial response of the Ministry of Works and Transport to the 8th report of the Public Accounts Committee on the examination of the report of the Auditor General on a special audit of the Public Transport Service Commission. Thank you very kindly, Madam Speaker.
Minister of Public Utilities.
Madam Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Public Utilities, I have the honor to lay the paper number 4, which is the annual administrative report of the Trinidad and Tobago Solid Waste Management Company Limited for the period October 1st, 2014 to September 30th, 2015. Thank you very kindly, Madam Speaker.
The Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have the honor to lay the report of the Auditor General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the financial statements of the Airports Authority of Trinidad and Tobago for the year ended December 31st, 2013. The report of the Auditor General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the financial statements of the North Central Regional Health Authority for the year ended September 30th, 2009. The report of the Auditor General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the financial statements of the North Central Regional Health Authority for the year ended 2010. Are we getting better? The report of the Auditor General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the financial statements for the North Central Regional Health Authority for the year ended September 30th, 2011. The report of the Auditor General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the financial statements of the North Central Regional Health Authority for the year ended September 30th, 2012. And finally, the report of the Auditor General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the financial statements of the North Central Regional Health Authority for the year ended September 30th, 2013. I beg to move that papers 6 to 11 be referred to the Public Accounts Committee.
Honorable members, the question is that papers 6 to 11 be referred to the Public Accounts Committee. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I have the honor to lay paper number 12, the 39th annual report of the Ombudsman for the year 2016. Thank you.
Minister of Labour and Small Enterprise Development.
Thank you very kindly, Madam Speaker. On behalf of the Minister of Labour and Small Enterprise Development, I have the honor to lay paper number 13, the annual report of the Registration, Recognition and Certification Board for the year 2015.
The Minister of Rural Development and Local Government.
Madam Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Rural Development and Local Government, I have the honor to lay paper number 14, the annual administrative report of the Kuva Tabaki Talparo Regional Corporation for the fiscal year October 1st, 2014 to September 30th, 2015.
The Attorney General.
Madam Speaker, I have the honor to lay the Freedom of Information Exemption Order 2017.
Reports from committees.
Member for San Fernando East.
Madam Speaker, I have the honor to present the following reports. The 10th report of the Public Accounts Committee on the examination of the audited financial statements of the Eastern Regional Health Authority for the financial years 2008 to 2013. The 11th report of the Public Accounts Committee on the examination of the audited financial statements of the Land Settlement Agency for the financial years 2008 and 2009. The 12th report of the Public Accounts Committee on the examination of the report of the Auditor General on the public accounts of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago for the financial year 2016. The 13th report of the Public Accounts Committee on the examination of the report of the Auditor General on the public accounts of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago for the financial year 2016 with specific reference to the Ministry of Finance. The 14th report of the Public Accounts Committee on the examination of the report of the Auditor General on the public accounts of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago for the financial year 2016, with specific reference to the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries.
Member for Tobago East.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I have the honor to present the following report. The 6th report of the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee on an examination into the Tobago House of Assembly with specific reference to accountability and transparency, inventory control, internal audit, subhead 02, goods and services, subhead 03, minor equipment purchases, subhead 04, current transfers and subsidies, and subhead 09, development program consolidated fund. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Prime Minister's questions, urgent questions.
The member for Barataria-Sanwan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On behalf of the member for Barataria-Sanwan, question number 1 to the Minister of Health. Can the Minister indicate when outstanding money is owed to the St. Clair Medical Center for the provision of subsidized dialysis treatment will be paid?
Minister of Health.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I thank the Minister of, former Minister of Health for the question. The Medcorp is owed approximately $1.2 million. The total amount owed to all the dialysis centers is around $16.6 million. We are paying off parts of all of these outstanding monies within the next week. Medcorp will receive approximately $400,000 within the next week. But, Madam Speaker, what we owe to Medcorp has to be taken in the round and in consideration with following facts. From 2014 to now, we have paid Medcorp $7.5 million for dialysis, $20.6 million for radiotherapy services, and other surgical procedures, $576,000. We have done $30 million worth of business with Medcorp from 2014 to now. So it's a bit of a surprise that we have this long, rich history with Medcorp that this action would have been taken, but we are committed to paying them. This does not include $65.1 million paid for heart surgeries, which goes to Eric Williams, and a portion goes to Medcorp. So we have a very long, rich history with Medcorp to the tune of $30 million plus from 2014 to now, and we ask everyone to be mindful of the economic situations, and all patients from Medcorp have been sent to other dialysis centers, and no patient is going without dialysis.
For Caroni East, supplemental.
So, Caroni East. Honorable Minister, with the outstanding amounts owed to the other private subsidized dialysis centers, how would that affect the provision of care of dialysis to the other centers?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I welcome the question. The other dialysis centers, when they were contacted from Tuesday to take over the Medcorp patients, were only too glad to do it. And they told us that they are in total sympathy with us, and they will not be taking any action to stop services. And that is the type of patriotism we need in the country now. And I want to congratulate the other 9 dialysis centers for working with the government and understanding that the country needs us at this point in time. Thank you.
Supplemental for Caroni East.
Would you be kind enough to give some comments on the 2 dialysis centers that are supposed to be brought on by the state over a period of time? Yes, very.
I'm not going to allow that as a supplemental question. Member for Couva North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Can the Minister inform this House how soon will the outstanding contracts for early childhood care and education teachers be renewed?
Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I am very happy to respond to this question, especially since the member for Couva North and myself had a private discussion on this issue, and I gave her certain assurances. I am pleased to say that those assurances have been met. However, I must say that the contracts for these workers have come to an end. However, we have advertised the positions, and at present, we are shortlisting the applicants. Very soon, interviews will be held, and this matter will be resolved shortly. Thank you.
Member for Shagona, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Will the Honourable Minister indicate how many such positions we are talking about?
Education.
Madam Speaker, I will provide the Minister for Shagonas North with the details. The member with the details shortly, at the earliest convenience. Yes.
Member for St. Augustine.
To the Minister of Education, given that the current building housing students of the Curia Presbyterian School is rat-infested and in a derelict condition, can the Minister indicate when the new Curia Presbyterian School will be completed?
Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. The position with respect to the rat infestation at the Curia Presbyterian Primary School has been resolved. That's the first answer to the question. Secondly, as you know, we are challenged financially. However, we have prioritized a number of schools that we will be looking at urgently in 2018, and Curia Presbyterian is one of those schools. Thank you.
Supplemental member, St. Augustine.
I take little comfort having regard to the promise you had made that the school would have been on a priority list. It had been put for yes.
Second space.
Can you personally guarantee, sir, that it will be open in 2018?
Minister of Education.
Madam Speaker, I'm sure the member for St. Augustine would know and fully understand that I cannot give any personal guarantees.
Supplemental member for Oropouche West.
Honourable Minister, is there any reported cases of leptospirosis from that school? Is there? Is there any case of leptospirosis?
Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. As far as I am aware, no information has been brought to me with respect to cases of leptospirosis from that school. So I don't have that information. Thank you.
Member for Oropouche East.
To the Minister of Works and Transport. Can the Minister indicate whether the Port Authority of Trinidad and Tobago and/or the government has entered any contractual arrangement for use of the vessel Ocean Flower 2?
Minister of Works and Transport.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, on the 17th of June 2017, the Ministry of Works and Transport did enter into an agreement for the Ocean Flower 2. That agreement has since been cancelled on the 8th of August, and at this point in time, there is no agreement with the Ocean Flower 2.
Supplemental member for Oropouche East.
Thank you, Minister, for the answer. Could the Minister also indicate which, if any, vessel will replace the TNT Express, which is scheduled for dry docking in the very near future?
I will not allow that as a supplemental question arising out. Member for Oropouche East.
Thank you very much. Could the Minister indicate the nature of the breakdown of the Cabo Star and whether that vessel is fit for duty at this time?
I will not allow that as a supplemental question either arising out of the question or the response. Member for Pointe-a-Pierre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Question number 5 to the Minister of Works and Transport. Based on recent reports which stated that government is making satisfactory progress in the search for a passenger vessel for Trinidad and Tobago Sea Bridge, can the Minister state the timeline in which citizens can expect this new vessel to be operational on the sea bridge?
Minister of Works and Transport.
Madam Speaker, I can confirm that the government is making satisfactory progress in the search for a passenger vessel for the Trinidad and Tobago Sea Bridge, and a statement will be made shortly by the Cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you.
Supplemental question, member for Pointe-a-Pierre.
Supplemental, Madam Speaker, to the Minister. Could the Minister state, based on his answer, what arrangements are being in place to alleviate the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago transport between Trinidad and Tobago over this Christmas period?
Minister of Works and Transport.
Madam President, at this point Madam Speaker, at this point in time, we do have a cargo vessel which is en route as we speak to Tobago. We have the TNT Express, and in the event of any excess passengers, we will bring in one of the water taxi in service.
Very nice. Supplemental, member for Point of Prayer. Member for Princestown.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, through you to the Honourable Minister of Rural Development and Local Government. Given the concerns of the Charlotte Street vendors regarding their request to ply their trade on additional days during the Christmas season, could the Minister indicate whether any consideration would be given to the concerns raised?
Minister of Rural Development and Local Government.
Madam Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Rural Development and Local Government, we have certainly considered the concerns raised by the vendors in the city of Port of Spain. The Mayor of Port of Spain met with the Heritage Route Vending Association, which represents the vendors for Charlotte Street, on Tuesday of this week, and came to an agreement that they will be allowed to vend on the street for certain days, which are Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays for 24 hours a day. The Port of Spain City Council sat and deliberated on the practice of vending in the city and wanted to ensure that they brought order to the streets of Port of Spain. The decision to have vending on certain days was taken to ensure the safety of the business people on Charlotte Street, pedestrians, motoring traffic, as well as the vendors themselves. Thank you very kindly, Madam Speaker.
Supplemental, member for Princestown.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the Honourable Minister, in light of the answer that you provided, and you speak about the law and order on the streets of Port of Spain with respect to the vending, can you indicate whether or not any municipal police will be involved in maintaining that law and order? And out of the 100 that has been promised throughout the regional corporations, how many exist at the Port of Spain City Corporation?
Those are two questions. I will only allow the first one.
Thank you very kindly, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, with regard to the first question, yes, as is customary, there will be security provided by both the municipal police and the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service.
Supplemental question, member for Princestown.
Honourable Minister, in light of that answer, can you indicate out of the 100 that has been promised at each regional corporation, could you indicate how many currently exist that will assist in this effort in the Port of Spain City Corporation?
Madam Speaker, at this time, with regard to the promised 100 for each municipal corporation, there were advertisements that were published in the newspapers for persons to apply. Persons have applied, and we are now in the Statutory Authority Service Commission is now in the process of interviewing persons.
Member for Orpooch West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the Minister of Health, with regards to reports that the Sinclair Medical Center did not receive any payments for the past 9 months and is threatening to cut dialysis treatment to hundreds of patients, how does the Minister plan to ensure the patients continue to receive treatment in a timely manner? It more or less has been answered. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Sinclair Medical Center did not threaten to cut, they did cut. When they cut on Tuesday, we immediately took steps to transfer all 40 patients to a combination of Port of Spain General Hospital and other providers which were only too glad to accept them. Madam Speaker, the culture shift that Dr. Derek Chen spoke about and that was eulogized in Tuesday's Express editorial, that he was waiting for a culture shift for 20 years, which is now occurring in the public health sector, will now gather more steam as Northwest RHA will bring 5 more chairs online soon, and Southwest, we are moving them from 4 to 15 chairs. We are doing all of this, and I have been proactive to lessen the state's dependence on the private sector for the provision of dialysis services. Millions of dollars in subsidies have been spent to the private sector, and this move by Medco concretizes in my mind that my approach and this government's approach to finally deal with the public healthcare sector and its delivery is the correct path as we seek to do more and more procedures in-house. So Northwest will have 5 more chairs in 2018, and we are moving Southwest from its current 4 to 15 chairs. Madam Speaker, there are a total of 145 chairs in the private sector and 55 in the public sector. I will be moving rapidly to lessen this government's dependence on the private sector for dialysis services. Thank you very much.
Honourable members, the time for urgent questions has now expired.
Questions on notice.
Leader of the House.
Thank you very kindly, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to say that we will be answering all oral questions asked. With regard to the written questions, we will answer questions 44 to 50 and 51. And we have already delivered those answers, and we are asking for deferral of questions 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, and 36.
So the deferral sort is granted. I now call upon member for Urupuch West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Question number 48 to the Minister of Education.
Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. The Ministry of Education is at present in discussion with the Ministry of Finance to see what can be done with respect to additional funding for the University of Trinidad and Tobago in this fiscal year. These discussions are ongoing. Thank you very much.
Supplemental member for Urupuch West.
Yes, please. In light of UTT's chairman's claim that it would be unable to make payroll commitments beyond January 2018, what action will be taken to assist those persons affected?
Minister of Education.
Madam Chairman, Madam Speaker, with all due respect to the member for Urupuch West, that question is premature.
Member for Chaguanas East supplemental.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Will the Honourable Minister indicate, in terms of the discussions and the shortfall, what figures are you looking at in terms of the additional? You're not hearing it properly. Let me repeat with you. I was just asking the question, Honourable Minister, in terms of the discussions you're having with the Ministry of Finance, with respect to the shortfall or the further amount of financing for UTT, can you indicate what is that sum that you're looking at?
Minister of Education.
Again, Madam Speaker, I'm not in a position at this time to reveal those numbers. Even today, I met with both the union and the board of UTT, and we are still trying our best to see how we can resolve this matter. Thank you.
Member for Urupuch West, supplemental.
Supplemental?
Yes.
Honourable Minister, did the Ministry of Finance and Education conduct any consultation with UTT before making these budgetary cuts?
Minister of Education.
Madam Speaker, the process of consultation is ongoing. And when we are to determine the allocations to our various ministries and our various bodies, it is through consultation. And yes, consultations were held. Thank you.
For Urupuch East, supplemental.
To the very distinguished member for Arima, could you indicate the reasons for the non-participation of the trade union, the OWTU, this morning?
I'm not going to allow that as a supplemental question. Member for Urupuch West.
Madam Speaker, question number 49 to the Minister of National Security.
Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the meeting of November the 7th, 2017, between the Minister of National Security, the Attorney General, Commissioner of Prisons, along with officials from the Prison Officers Association, an oral request was made for protection of the prison officers. the Commissioner of Prisons was advised to engage the Commissioner of Police with respect to those officers whose lives were deemed to be under threat in the prison service. Madam Speaker.
Supplemental question, member for Caroni East.
Would that entail any consideration for the issue of firearms to the prison officers?
Minister of National Security.
Madam Speaker, the discussion continues between the Commissioner of Prisons and the Commissioner of Police. They will determine the effect of protection guarantee.
Member for Oropouche West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Question number 50 to the Minister of National Security.
Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, on Thursday, November the 2nd, 2017, approximately 25 prison officers formed a contingent that visited the Canadian Embassy, seeking information with regards to the procedure on how to seek asylum in Canada. The Ministry of National Security is mindful of the concerns of these and other law enforcement officers and remains committed to treating with their safety and security. While measures to treat with these concerns are being explored, the prison officers who form this contingent are being cautioned, or have been cautioned, Madam Speaker, to reevaluate their stance and consider the strain on the agencies of the criminal justice system and the threats to public safety which may occur. So they follow through with a vocalized intent. Nonetheless, it should be noted that any application for leave of absence or request to terminate employment services must go through the standard human resource channels. If and when approvals are granted, officers will then be unrestricted in the determination of their next course of action. The Trinidad and Tobago Prison Service has advised of an overall strategy to address possible manpower inadequacies. As recently as September of this year, there was an intake of 284 male and female recruits. The Trinidad and Tobago Prison Service is also expected to complete another exercise to shortlist candidates for positions of male prison officers and prison drivers in early 2018. When completed, the particulars of the qualified candidates will be provided to the Service Commission Department, which will be responsible for setting an examination date and notifying qualified persons of same. Furthermore, Madam Speaker, in the event that the actions of some officers may seem to lead towards a possible shortage of personnel at the nation's prisons, the Trinidad and Tobago Prison Service stands ready to advance a number of short-term workforce planning strategies. These include granted approval for prison officers to work extra hours, sanctioning that prison officers take up extra duties, authorizing a temporary reduction in the number of persons allowed to proceed on vacation leave if necessary, and of course augmenting the staff complement with the officers who resume duties from official leave by placing them in specific areas. Madam Speaker.
Supplemental member for Kamuta Mansinilla.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Honorable Minister, could you advise this House if, in fact, prison officers are issued bulletproof vests in the line of their duty?
I will not allow that as a supplemental question.
Request for leave to move the adjournment of the House on definite matters of urgent public importance, statements by ministers, personal explanations, introduction of bills, motions relating to the business or sittings of the House and moved by a Minister of Public Business, Government Business motions.
Minister of Trade and Industry.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to move motion number 1, standing in my name. Madam Speaker, in moving this motion, I seek the leave of the House in accordance with Standing Order 51 to debate along with this matter motion number 2 on the order paper, which relates to the same subject.
Is this the wish of the House?
No, Madam Speaker. I object to doing the two motions together.
Therefore, the motions have to be taken separately. Minister of Trade and Industry.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Whereas Section 56(1)(a) of the Customs Act, Chapter 7801, that the House of Representatives may, from time to time, by resolution, provide that any class of goods specified in the resolution shall be exempt from import duties of customs if the goods are imported or entered for use by any person or any purpose specified in the resolution during any period to be fixed by the Minister, in each particular case, not being a period terminating later than the date prescribed in the resolution, as the last day on which such exemption shall be operative and subject to such conditions as the Minister may impose. And whereas, by legal notice number 216 of 2015, the last resolution in respect of the goods identified therein came into effect on 1st January 26, would expire on 31st December 2017. And whereas it is expedient that the goods continue to be exempt from import duties of customs as of 1st January 2018, be it resolved that the House of Representatives, in accordance with and subject to the provisions of Section 56(1)(a) of the Customs Act, exempt from import duties of customs the classes of goods imported and entered for use in Trinidad and Tobago for the following purposes set out in the list of conditional duty exemptions in the third schedule to the Customs Act. A, approved industry in Part A, subheading 1. B, approved agriculture, livestock, forestry, and fisheries in Part A, subheading 2. C, approved hotels in Part A, subheading 3. D, approved mining purposes in Part A, subheading 4. And E, other approved purposes in Part A, subheading 5, for the period beginning 1st January 2018 and ending 31st December 2020. Madam Speaker, this is a straightforward motion. And in short order, this motion is about concessions to the private sector in the main. It's about the relief of customs duties. And my discussions are therefore surrounding just that. Madam Speaker, the purpose of the motion is to seek an extension of the benefits granted pursuant to Section 51A of the Customs Act. And these benefits, which were introduced in 1959, currently apply to approved industry, approved agriculture, livestock, forestry and fisheries, approved hotels, approved mining purposes, and other approved purposes. These concessions enable companies incorporated in Trinidad and Tobago and engaged in the aforementioned sectors to acquire the necessary foreign inputs such as raw materials, machinery and equipment at world market prices without being subject to customs duties on entry. These benefits allow domestic businesses to obtain raw materials that are otherwise unavailable in the local and regional markets and to access modern equipment and technology that improve their productivity. It is also important to note that this provision ensures that companies are not placed at a disadvantage in terms of their international competitiveness. For the period January 1st, 2016 to July 1st, 2017, 125 non-energy companies of varying sizes benefited from the customs duty exemptions under this facility. And for this period, these firms by sector include, in the manufacturing sector, 110 companies involved in manufacturing food and beverage, wood and metal furniture, industrial chemicals, construction products, and textiles and garments. And also agriculture, livestock, forestry, and fisheries. 8 farmers producing vegetables and rearing animals such as sheep, goats, and cattle. In the tourism sector, 1 hotel in Trinidad and 3 hotels in Tobago. And under other approved purposes, 3 companies engage in various activities. Madam Speaker, over the period October 2016 to September 2017, the firms who made use of these concessions under the provisions of the Customs Act exported approximately $3.6 billion. That's TT. Madam Speaker, the respective sectors which are eligible for exemption from customs duties are set out in the list of conditional duty exemptions in the third schedule of the Customs Act. This list is a regional one, approved by CARICOM, and applies to all member states. It is also important to note that the Ministry of Trade and Industry has engaged a CARICOM Secretariat to ensure that items related to Trinidad and Tobago's priority areas remain included in the list. I will briefly outline the government's rationale for continuing exemptions in each of these areas. Industry. Madam Speaker, the manufacturing sector is one of the key priority sectors in our plan to diversify the economy. It is dynamic, employs a considerable proportion of our labor force, and has consistently been a substantial foreign exchange earner. Trinidad and Tobago's manufacturing sector is the largest in the English-speaking Caribbean. It maintains several competitive advantages, including competitively priced electricity and natural gas, 2 international ports, good availability of local or imported raw materials, a strong domestic market, and relatively easy access to regional and other markets within our hemisphere. The manufacturing sector employs a significant portion of our labor force. And according to the CSO's estimates as at March 2017, approximately 48,900 people, or 7.63% of the total active labor force, are employed in manufacturing locally. Therefore, to ensure stability and encourage growth and increased employment, it is important that this sector continues to receive government support to level the playing field in allowing approved firms to access raw materials and equipment at international market prices, but without duties. Madam Speaker, Trinidad and Tobago's manufactured goods currently reach over 120 markets globally. The government continues to facilitate the expansion of our manufacturing sector beyond traditional export markets in the Caribbean. Over the past year, the country has been actively engaged in advancing technical discussions to improve trade relations with Cuba, Dominican Republic, Panama, Costa Rica, and Chile. To complement this, the Ministry of Trade and Industry has completed work on its national export strategy as well. Madam Speaker, despite the sector's resilience throughout these economic times, it is not without its challenges. And one such constraint is the difficulty faced by domestic firms in penetrating or expanding foreign markets due to varying standards, language barriers, the lack of information and awareness, and a general tendency to favor trade with countries that we traditionally trade with. It is that the Export TT, the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards, and the Ministry of Trade and Industry continue to work closely with existing and emerging manufacturers to ensure that they find a place in this expanding sector. The government remains committed to the expansion of the manufacturing sector and appreciates that this sector is pivotal to the transformation of the economy. 2 new facilities were launched since the budget statement, which will provide targeted support for the manufacturing sector. A new grant fund facility was launched in November 2017, which will provide financial assistance to local companies in manufacturing and agro-processing. And this grant will cover up to 50% of the cost of machinery and equipment and will be capped at $250,000 per firm. This fund was established to support small and medium-sized export-oriented entrepreneurs in manufacturing and agro-processing by providing grants to acquire machinery and equipment, to increase capacity to meet global requirements and increase productive investment. Madam Speaker, within the first week of this launch, there have been more than 100 inquiries into this grant fund facility. Additionally, in November 2017, the Ministry of Trade and Industry launched a new research and development facility under Export TT. The new facility provides a maximum of US $1 million over 3 phases, TT $1 million over 3 phases, from feasibility to product development to commercialization. Export TT has advised that since the launch of this new facility, there have been 10 inquiries and 3 proposals in the areas of ICT services, manufacturing, and agribusiness. These funds are in addition to the government's initiatives to increase Exim Bank's portfolio by US $55 million to provide for trade financing and discounting arrangements for local export-oriented manufacturers, and also to capitalize Exim Bank to the tune of US $100 million for the benefit of eligible manufacturers and exporters to access raw materials and other essential inputs. Madam Speaker, these new facilities will also be complemented with the implementation of a $50 million TT Business Development Incentive Program. Madam Speaker, there is a need for us to take the necessary measures to improve our global competitiveness. And in this regard, these exemptions will allow our manufacturers to increase productivity and to improve domestic value added as a means to producing internationally competitive goods. I now move to agriculture, livestock, forestry, and fisheries. Madam Speaker, in addition to manufacturing, agriculture has been identified as one of the sectors earmarked within the government's diversification strategy. The success of this sector contributes to increased food security, agricultural exports, employment, and conservation of foreign exchange, while also providing an incentive for people to live more healthy and productive lifestyles. According to the Review of the Economy 2017, the value of agricultural production in 2016 was $582.8 million, or 0.4% of our GDP. Our food import bill, however, continues to command a considerable proportion of our foreign exchange. Increased agro-processing is one of the solutions to the key challenges facing Trinidad and Tobago. And according to the Oxford Business Group 2017 report for Trinidad and Tobago, the case for increased agro-processing in Trinidad and Tobago is based on the following considerations. That while primary agriculture and livestock represents only 0.4% of GDP in value chain terms, it links into the food and beverages and tobacco segment of the manufacturing sector industry, which accounts for 3.5% of GDP. Any incremental increase in either domestic or export agricultural production will reduce the country's food dependency and contribute to a net foreign currency saving. And although Trinidad and Tobago is a relatively small global agriculture and livestock producer, it has the ability to produce local raw materials into relatively small batches, but with high-value quantities of tropical products. Madam Speaker, in October 2016, Cabinet also approved the development of the new agro-processing and light industrial park at Maruga to support this agro-processing industry. The procurement process to engage a design-build contractor has commenced with tenders being advertised via newspaper on December 7, 2017. And this contract is scheduled to be awarded within the next 2 months. And this park will provide the foundation upon which businesses will be able to grow and prosper, create employment, and attract investment. All these initiatives are geared towards increasing revenue and decreasing our reliance on food imports. I go now to hotels. As soon as efforts are made to restore macroeconomic stability and diversify Trinidad and Tobago's economy, the tourism industry remains critical to the overall process. Though it is one of the smaller sectors in terms of its contribution to GDP, its potential for expansion and growth is significant. The government has commenced the restructured and upgrade of the institutional, the regulatory and marketing systems in the tourism sector, with its primary decision to replace the Tourism Development Company with separate agencies for Trinidad and Tobago. Also approved by the government was the establishment of a new regulatory authority for the tourism sector, the Trinidad and Tobago Tourism Regulatory and Licensing Authority. It is expected that these reforms will improve the quality, the standards, and international competitiveness of Trinidad and Tobago's tourism product. Madam Speaker, this sector has the potential to be another key foreign exchange earner for the country. It can achieve this while simultaneously utilizing and marketing our natural resources and providing significant employment opportunities for our citizens. In addition, the rewards from this sector will encourage deeper business linkages, aid in the creation of niche products, and encourage sustainable investments within and outside this sector. To achieve this, however, we will require active participation from the private sector, and customs duty exemptions will incentivize, among other things, investment in hotel development, and which will lead to higher quality room stock, which will in turn attract a wider range and number of tourists from across the globe with varying budgets, needs, and preferences. I now comment on mining purposes. Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, according to the review of the economy 2017, mining and quarrying contributes to 19.1% of real GDP. And notably, the CSO estimates indicates that this sector employed 800 persons as of the first quarter in 2017. Apart from its contribution in terms of output and employment, the mining sector has direct forward linkages to the construction industry, which is heavily dependent on it for raw materials. The construction industry is very beneficial to the overall economy through job creation, consumer spending, and stimulation of economic activity and growth. Madam Speaker, given the expansion in construction and road infrastructure projects, mineral production is integral to Trinidad and Tobago's national development. It is believed that the provisions under the third schedule to the Customs Act will further encourage the development of this sector by allowing companies to acquire the machinery and equipment at world market prices and without duty. And this can have positive and direct effects on the quality of the roads and buildings, and it incentivizes private sector participation. I now move to other approved businesses. Madam Speaker, the other areas for which import duty exemptions are being sought include navigation equipment for boats, equipment to be used in sports and recreational activities, and public transport type vehicles. Exemptions on sports and recreational equipment are aimed at encouraging a healthier and happier population, which will contribute to youth and economic development, as well as serve as a foundation for sports tourism and other related sectors. Trinidad and Tobago is now positioned in sports tourism as a viable emerging industry for economic diversification. As identified in the Budget Statement 2018, The limited road network and the deficiencies in the public transportation system have become the main causes of traffic congestion and a principal contributor to the low level of labor productivity in the country. Customs duty exemptions on public transport type vehicles ultimately contributes to a reduction in traffic congestion and improves mobility to all areas of Trinidad and Tobago. In addition, this measure has the potential to indirectly reduce overall fuel consumption and the country's carbon footprint, as well as improve overall productivity and reduce lost man hours. Madam Speaker, the government is of the view that the continuation of this regime is critical to the development of all of the aforementioned non-energy sectors. Accordingly, Madam Speaker, it is recommended that this motion be passed in this Honourable House to allow the Minister with responsibility for industry to grant import duty concessions to approved industry, approved agriculture, livestock, forestry and fisheries, approved hotels, approved mining purposes and other approved purposes. I beg to move that this motion standing in my name be approved.
Honourable members, I will now propose the question for debate. Be it resolved that the House of Representatives, in accordance with and subject to the provision of Section 56 of the Customs Act, exempt from import duties of customs the classes of goods imported or entered for use in Trinidad and Tobago for the respective purposes set out in the list of conditional duty exemptions in the third schedule to the Customs Act for A, approve agriculture, livestock, forestry, and fisheries in Part A, subheading Roman numerals 2. B, approve hotels in Part A, subheading Roman numeral 3. C, approve mining purposes in Part A, subheading Roman numeral 4. And D, other approved purposes in Part A, subheading Roman numeral 5, for the period beginning 1st January 2018 and ending 31st of December 2020. Member for Couva North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for the opportunity to contribute in this debate on this order. First of all, Madam Speaker, let me take this opportunity to thank the staff, your good self of the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago, colleagues on both sides of the House for their support and well wishes during my pregnancy and, of course, after. So with that, Madam Speaker, let me focus on the issue at hand. Section 56(1)(a) of the Customs Act, Chapter 78(1), is asking, of course, it's a resolution asking for agreement from the House for the renewal of agreement by legal notice for the continued exemptions on a list, as attached in the appendix, on a list of items that the Honourable Minister of Trade and Industry just spoke on. And it's categorized under industry in Part A, agriculture, livestock, forestry, and fisheries, approved hotels, approved mining purposes, and other approved purposes. Now, Madam Speaker, the Minister sounded, through her rushed presentation, didn't sound too convinced with respect to the impact of these exemptions and, of course, how it is helping to promote diversification in Trinidad and Tobago. And there is no data, no statistics coming from the Minister of Trade and Industry to at least support the renewal of these exemptions for the upcoming years. Now, Madam Speaker, the Minister was just very generalized in her contribution, and therefore I would like to ask of her, when she's winding up, with respect to the data and the statistics with some of these important exemptions that pertain to our diversification trust. And I make mention of mining, fisheries, hotels, agriculture especially. Because, Madam Speaker, we know what is happening out there. We have seen a government who has sat in power for close to 3 years, and, well, nearly 3 years. And what is happening is that they have failed they have failed to really push the diversification trust that we expected them to do, and especially when they campaigned on their platform in 2015, they spoke about agriculture and tourism. And to date, Madam Speaker, there is no real progression towards this diversification trust that they spoke about then and they continue to speak about. Now, Madam Speaker, I want to focus on tourism and approve exemptions to hotels. Now, Minister, if I'm not mistaken, you said it was 1 hotel in Trinidad and 3 in Tobago, if I'm not mistaken, with respect to exemptions. I would like you to identify in your winding up these hotels that benefit from these exemptions. And if you have the data to show whether or not this tourism trust, over your tenure, we have seen an increase in tourists coming to stay at these hotels, what type of marketing strategies exist to show that you all are serious about this tourism trust that we keep hearing about and nothing is being done. Now, in addition to that, Madam Speaker, we would have heard from the Prime Minister, from the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Tourism in their budget debates, respective budget debates about sandals and bringing sandals to Trinidad and Tobago. And quite recently, we would have heard from the Prime Minister himself, I think it was at a post-cab press briefing, if I'm not mistaken, in Parliament, right, okay, saying that sandals has now put us down the list and was alluding to part of that was because of the opposition's approach in the House and all of that. And we would have seen the Prime Minister over the years keep blaming the opposition for certain things that have not gone his way or how he would want it to go. But public opinion, Madam Speaker, I mean, we cannot underestimate public opinion in this day and age, especially in this age of information, social media. Everybody has access to social media. And of course, in the event where mainstream media does not report all, or honestly, we have social media doing so. And why I say this, Madam Speaker, it is because the population has understood that you can't keep blaming an opposition after 2 years for your failures. You just cannot keep doing that. So, you know, the goodly Prime Minister would know this. He is aware of this. And then quite recently, I saw him, you know, playing victim on TV, saying that his character was being attacked and maligned. And I think that was after the non-support of the anti-gang bill. Now, Madam Speaker, why I say all of this, it is because this government has a duty to the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. And here we are in this House today coming to renew a resolution to continue with exemptions to various industries, especially agriculture and tourism, where we are supposed to see government working and partnering with private sector at least, to have the trust in agriculture and the trust in tourism move up and go forward. And we have not seen any sort of improvement since 2015 with this government. And therefore, that is why I take umbrage to the minister's contribution, because the minister has come to this House and just generalized her contribution, read the resolution here on the order paper, and refuses to back it up and justify why we should go back now for another year to renew the exemptions. So, Madam Minister, I'm asking for some clarity, some data, some sort of information to back up this renewal of the exemptions that you're asking for. Now, going back to the Tourism Trust, Madam Speaker, again, and I want to ask through in this forum, of course, whether be it the Minister of Trade and Industry or the Minister of Tourism, to give us an update as to really what is happening with the Sandals project. Because we're hearing voices out there, you know, saying X, Y, and Z, but we have not had a definite statement from either the Prime Minister or the Minister of Tourism or the Minister of Trade and Industry. Because it is known that if it is, I know that a statement had gone out from the OPM stating that the government would
Member for Couva North, I'll allow you to continue. Please bring your contribution in line.
Madam Speaker, thank you very much. And I was just really drawing reference from the Minister of Trade and Industry when she spoke about diversification and how this can help diversification. So I'm asking the relevant questions. I mean, if they don't have an answer, they could just get up and say that they don't have an answer, you know. But, Madam Speaker, that is what I'm asking for. You're hearing voices in the wilderness from the government and saying all kinds of things about sandals. I know that...
I'll allow you some leeway. As I said, bring it into your customs.
So the government would have talked about the construction of the Sandals Hotel. We heard the Minister of Trade and Industry talking about exemption of import duties on construction materials for hotels. And I know that the government had sent out a press release stating that the arrangement, part of the arrangement with Sandals Hotels was to, of course, have the government construct the hotel and then have Sandals run the establishment. And that is why I'm asking for clarity and asking for information as to what is going to happen. Because if we are renewing these exemptions, I would think that it would be a steal of a deal for private sector to partner with the government to construct the hotel and then have Sandals come and run the establishment. So, Madam Speaker, that is what I was alluding to. And I think that the Minister of Trade and Industry has a duty to report to the Parliament and to the wider public when clarity is sought. And therefore, I want to focus on that. Now, in addition to that, Madam Speaker, we would have seen in the Caribbean region over the past couple of months where we would have had, and now that is also a decision that the government needs to make. And I would like to be as bold as to ask whether or not the Prime Minister would have driven a hard bargain in the best interests of Trinidad and Tobago with respect to Sandals coming to Tobago. Because we would have seen with our CARICOM brothers and sisters, in particular Prime Minister Gaston Brown, speaking against Sandals and saying, you know, well, okay, it is at a disadvantage. The people of his country, they are at a disadvantage with Sandals in the country. And we would have seen where there was negotiations, renewal of negotiations for exemptions in their country. And Prime Minister Gaston Brown would have alluded to being taken advantage of by Sandals International. And of course, there was the back and forth between Sandals and Prime Minister Gaston Brown, but it is something that we cannot just ignore. And therefore, I would say quite boldly that I would be pleased if the Prime Minister, again, would have sat down at the negotiations with his team and drive a hard bargain in the benefit and in the interest of Trinidad and Tobago. And that is why Sandals backed down. So, I mean, the government has nothing to be afraid of.
48-1.
Member for Couva North, I'm not going to allow this to be a discussion about Sandals. Okay? If you tie anything you want to with respect to what is before us on the order, I will allow it. But this is not a general discussion, so I uphold the point of order.
Moving on a bit, Madam Speaker, but still on the approved exemptions for hotels. So the Minister of Trade and Industry would have spoken about the benefits that these exemptions would have for the hotel industry and for the Tourism Trust. But Madam Speaker, what is the point in renewing these certain exemptions to approved hotels especially when we have serious problems, transportation problems, between Trinidad and Tobago? So we have these exemptions that are there for the benefit of the tourism industry, to the benefit of the Hotels Association, but we have a debilitating effect with respect to the transportation and the issues between Trinidad and Tobago. And we would have seen over the past 2 years the issues that would have arisen. And therefore, I beg to ask the question, where it is you are giving exemptions to these hotels to encourage tourists to come to your hotel, to stay, to generate revenue and all of that, and to move away from the oil and gas industry. Exactly. They just cannot reach the destination of Tobago to begin with. And when you look at both the air bridge and the sea bridge, you are seeing a total breakdown. There's chaos there. Just yesterday, we would have seen in the news where the Cabo Star broke down, and they sent out a press release about it, saying that it's back it's back in and all of that. So, Madam Speaker, you know, they would protest, obviously, because they know that they look bad in the face of the public. They know that they're looking bad with respect to not being able to handle and deal with the transportation issues with the sea bridge and the air bridge. And then another question arises, Madam Speaker, with respect to transportation. Because if we are trying to promote the tourism trust and diversify our economy, we have to have reliable transportation. We just cannot, you know, pop up every Monday morning and say, okay, there was a breakdown and now it's all good. That is not reliability of service. It is not.
Members, I would like to hear the contribution from the member of Couva North, and I'm being somewhat disturbed. Please continue.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I was talking about reliability of service, Madam Speaker. So there's no reliability of service, and here we are as the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago continuing to approve exemptions for the hotel chains, for the other sectors within private sector to get involved, and yet still it is not happening. So what is going wrong? What is going wrong really? And that is what I want the Minister of Trade and Industry to clarify. What are her policies? What are her programs to try to promote tourism using these said exemptions to try to attract private sector to partner with the government so that we can really see true diversification when it comes to tourism in Trinidad and Tobago? Now, Madam Speaker, it's quite funny because the Minister mentioned the two new tourism companies, one for Trinidad and one for Tobago. And whether you believe it or not, the highlight of the Tourism Secretariat attached to the THA is the missing $10 million. That is the highlight of the Tourism Secretariat. And where it is we are looking forward to hearing from this new company or from this new entity say, well, okay, you know what, these are our plans and policies. This is what we are going to implement to attract tourists to Tobago. What we have now is a defense of the same bad management of the Tobago Jazz Festival. What is happening, and I saw in the news, is that they have said...
Speaker 48.1, this is not about the Tobago Jazz Festival.
And I uphold the objection, member. Remember, this is not about tourism. This is not about any specific. These are about certain exemptions to deal with certain issues here set out. Please.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, these exemptions, especially the part for approval for hotels in Part A, as I said before, the Minister spoke about the tourism trust and the diversification of the economy via tourism. And therefore, if she can speak about, if the member can mention it and speak about it, I see it fit to respond likewise.
Always subject to the ruling of the chair. Please.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, as I was saying, so here it is, we have this Tobago tourism company who would, of course, rely on these exemptions. If it is that they are going to promote tourism in Tobago, they are going to rely on these exemptions, put a package together, market it to the private sector, market it to international, hotel conglomerations who would want to come in Tobago, and I make reference to Sandals. But at the end of the day, you have poor transportation, you have bad management of the THA and the Tourism Secretariat, and therefore it is like spinning top in mud. It is a lost cause, Madam Speaker. And that is why we need so...
Chip Whip, while I know it's necessary for you to try to protect your members, I think member for Couva North is quite experienced and she's doing quite well. Please continue.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, what I was alluding to, again, as I said before, it's that you have these exemptions in front of us. The Minister of Trade and Industry spoke about promoting tourism, promoting diversification, and here I am given the flip side of the story, because you can't depend on government to give you the real story or to be honest about the tourism situation in Trinidad and Tobago. So we have a breakdown with respect to transportation between Trinidad and Tobago. You have lack of investment, both from international companies and now local companies. And on top of that, you have poor and bad management by the THA, and I make reference to the Tourism Secretariat. You have missing monies I would like to know what's going on with that. What is an update, if there's any at all, that we can get? Because, Madam Speaker, that 10 million could have gone to promoting and marketing tourism for Tobago. And therefore, Madam Speaker, my point is, again, as I said before, you know, we come to Parliament with things that have been established. You know, they talk about precedent because this existed under our tenure, of course. But unlike them, we were really working to promote tourism and agriculture in Trinidad and Tobago. And it came in 2015, it was renewed. We said, you know what, we'll give them a chance. It was renewed. Let's see what they can do with the renewal of the exemptions. And what is happening? We're here now in 2017 to renew again, with no real or tangible improvement in the agricultural sector and the tourism sector. And therefore, I think that the Minister of Trade and Industry owes us and owes the country clarification and explanation. And that is why I said at the beginning, there is no data to drive or to justify the renewal of these exemptions. Well, bring it. Bring the data. Let's see it. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You just have to be distracted.
The crosstalk, yes. Thank you. So, Madam Speaker, that is something that we need to take into consideration. Now, in addition to that, Madam Speaker, the Minister would have talked about mining with respect to construction materials and exemptions, but the Minister did not talk about the illegal mining aspect within the industry.
I would really urge members to please comply with Standing Order 53. While we may consider ourselves to be in a very light and festive period, it doesn't apply to us while we do the business that we engage here, please. So can we please comply with Standing Order 53?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So I move on to approve mining purposes in Part A, that aspect of the exemptions that we are here to renew. And the Minister of Trade and Industry would have spoke about the renewal of these exemptions for construction materials and all of that. But what she failed to identify and to deal with and to tell us how they were dealing with it was, of course, the illegal mining aspect of the industry that is ongoing.
Madam Speaker, 48.1, this is not about illegal mining.
Member, again, I want to caution you. I hope with the rest of your presentation, I would not have to rise on the same point of order again. So please bring it back to what is before us.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, again, because I think that I'm justified in asking, illegal mining hampers those operators who are licensed, who have a license to operate. There are criminals within that illegal mining.
Remember, this is with respect to import duties on certain classes of goods involved in these particular industries. So I'm not going to let you develop on illegal mining.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I will move on. Now, I know that my colleague from Mayaro will be dealing with agriculture, livestock, forestry, and fisheries. But I want to mention, as Member of Parliament for Couva North, I have a very viable and active fishing industry within the constituency. We have 3 fishing ports, the Brickfield Fishing Port, the Orange Valley, and the Cali Bay area. And we have a lot of, the Orange Valley Fishing Port is, of course, the largest in the country. And therefore, I take personal note of the exemptions attached to this particular sector. And to also say that whilst we have exemptions on certain goods and services attached to the fishing industry and to the agriculture, livestock, and forestry industry, we have to note that with the increase in diesel prices for some of the fishermen who engage in different type of fishing, and their boats, of course, uses the diesel fuel, because they are, of course, bigger boats, that they have been crying out for assistance from, of course, the government with respect to asking for a subsidy. So I want to ask the Minister of Trade and Industry if it is possible at all, to consider helping out these fishermen who have been asking for some sort of subsidy or even exemptions, even though it's custom duty exemptions, some sort of exemption that would assist, because you're talking also about placing emphasis on this particular sector to drive the diversification process. So I ask and I wait for the Minister to respond to that. With respect to agriculture, Madam Speaker, what we have seen for years in this country is that agriculture has failed to take off with respect to diversification, with respect to food security. And again, in 2015, the government would have campaigned on a platform to really push agriculture. Whilst we have these exemptions for raw materials, for processing, for packaging, and all of that, how effective is it really in reducing our food import bill? Because if we have exemptions of custom duties on all of these goods and services attached to the industry, livestock, forestry, agriculture, all of that, what is the impact? And again, I ask for data. There's a lack of data coming out of the Ministry of Trade and Industry as to how these exemptions has positively impacted upon the diversification trust moving forward with agriculture and fishery in Trinidad and Tobago. And again, I ask the Minister of Trade and Industry to please clarify if you can. Because when you speak to the farmers out there, they said, they will tell you, yes, there are exemptions. There are exemptions for agro-processing. There are exemptions for raw materials, etc. But at the end of the day, they may have land issues, problems with the Ministry of Agriculture in getting land to farm. I know that the Prime Minister had spoken about Chaguaramas Development Authority and the lands there being given to farmers. I wonder if it can be, or if the member, the Honorable Prime Minister, can consider, you know, taking more lands from that area and divesting it in the Ministry of Agriculture so that farmers can get land, because that is one of the problems in Trinidad and Tobago, land for farming. In addition to that, Madam Speaker, we also have other approved purposes in Part A, and it's a list also of exemptions. As you know, the appendix is quite extensive, and therefore, without itemizing it, there are a number of goods and services that are on that may need the minister to take a look at, you know, specifically and look at these exemptions for these particulars, because there are some where, you know, she may want to change, the member may want to change that regime. You have partial exemptions for a lot of items. I saw partial exemptions for a host, hundreds of items, and then you have full exemptions for some. So for those under partial exemptions, probably the minister would want to take a look at that listing and see whether or not, because Madam Speaker, we all know there is food inflation. The inflation rate for food continued to increase in Trinidad and Tobago. We have not had any sort of reporting from the Minister of Agriculture as to how he's going to deal with this huge food import bill. We have not heard any data as to whether or not it was, you know, they've been able to cut down, because they've always talked about, you know, reducing the food import bill, but we have not had any data to show such. And therefore, those goods with partial exemptions, we may want to look at that, because some of them, milk products, others, oil products. We know that when we go to the retail supermarket these days, food prices are extremely high. And some people will tell you out there that as you go monthly, the prices just keep increasing, jumping. And therefore, those goods that are under partial exemptions, the minister may want to look at and see if we can have full exemptions, especially on those food items that citizens would consume on a daily basis. Madam Speaker, it is quite interesting that yesterday, in yesterday's Newsday, there was an article with bandits going to a supermarket and stealing baby milk. And it was a particular age group, 6 months to 12 months. And they tried, or they attempted to steal a number of tins of baby milk, but they were, of course, caught. They were caught by the police. And Madam Speaker, I mean, this says something. Where we have our citizens now robbing supermarkets, not just for cash, but, you know, baby
Madam
milk.
Speaker, Standing Order 48-1. This is not a crime bill.
Member, please. Go on. Yes, I'm giving you a little leeway to tighten. If not, please move on to your next point, please.
Speaker, why I make reference to baby milk is that baby milk is on the appendix for exemption. And if the Minister of Health, Member of Parliament for St. Joseph, as Minister of Health, is not aware of it, it's better he vacate his position as Minister of Health. So, why I talk about this, Madam Speaker, it is because you have seen a change in trend and pattern with respect to how the criminals operate in Trinidad and Tobago. And now they're going to supermarkets, not just for cash or for alcohol, but for baby milk.
And we're not dealing with crime.
Correct.
And therefore, that's what I'm saying. We're not dealing with crime, so I will not allow you to go into crime. And therefore, if you could please move on.
Speaker, why I make reference to baby milk, and even though it was a situation of crime that it made the news, when we were in government, we had a policy, well, we had a program actually that we had launched with respect to the baby grant that would have allowed for mothers, especially single mothers, to be able to afford to purchase baby milk and other items attached to, of course, the growth of a child or a baby. So, Madam Speaker, it is really disheartening to have seen in the article what of course happened. And I want to ask the Minister, because I know that this exemption expired in August of 2015. And there was talk, of course, amongst the supermarket chain that when the order expired in August of 2015, that we would have seen that there was a 5%, actually, a 5% duty on this baby milk that would have been put. So, Madam Minister, I don't know, I need some clarification on that, whether or not that is true, because we are now in December coming to renew. So you would have had that lapse between August and December, where, of course, these exemptions would have not been applicable because it expired in August 2015. August 2017. So we need some clarification with respect to that. So, Madam Speaker, in addition to that,
Honourable Member for Couva North, your original speaking time is now spent. You're entitled to a further 15 minutes if you wish to avail yourself of it.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I will not be too long again. So, Madam Speaker, I just make reference to the baby milk because I know it is there in the list of exemptions. Baby wipes are also not on that list of exemptions, but what it is, I think there's no VAT on that. So there are a number of baby items, Madam Speaker, and when you look at the fabric of our society, we have seen an increase in single mothers. Probably we need to put all products associated to child rearing, baby, of course, baby care, put that on the list of exemptions. It would help you in your campaign, you know, if it is. And therefore, Madam Speaker, in my wrap-up, I just want to say that, again, refer to the Minister of Trade and Industry and say how poor her contribution was with respect to justification of the renewal of these exemptions. Whilst it was good for renewal in 2015, we need some data-driven facts from the Minister to show that renewing these exemptions are justified as it comes before us today. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Tobago West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I was not scheduled to speak today, notwithstanding that 48-1 was called all throughout the member opposite speech, and her ring rustiness, if I might. I want to welcome the member opposite back to the House and wish her all the best in her future endeavors with her family. Madam Speaker, I wanted to give my 2 cents in this debate because the member would have spoken about matters relating to tourism. Now, I find I'm amazed by the temerity, might I add the turpitude coming from the members opposite. Because, Madam Speaker, I remember being in opposition over the past 5 years and watching, observing, witnessing the way that the members opposite would have treated tourism while they were in government. And it's interesting that the member would come here today and speak glowingly about how hard they worked for tourism in Tobago and about transportation problems. Now, Madam Speaker, I could clearly recall that for the 5 years under the previous government, we would have sat there and witnessed them cordon, blocked off Crown Point International Airport with galvanized. And no work was done. No work was done. We were promised lights, we were promised refurbishment, we were promised new terminals and all that under the previous government because as a means of having...
So, Member for Tobago West, while I will allow you to respond, I'm not going to let you widen this into a debate about tourism. I circumscribe the member for Couva North considerably. So I will just let you respond to certain things, but not widen this debate about tourism, please.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Much obliged. I would just say, in passing, Madam Speaker, that these items that were needed to re-energize the sector were not done. And we sat there and we watched them twiddle their thumbs for the 5 years, and now we are here to do that. And I am a part, Madam Speaker, of a government that made a decision yesterday to move forward with that project so that Tobago could see a new, expanded and refurbished Crown Point International Airport. So the Cabinet took that decision yesterday, and that is going to be done under our watch. So, Madam Speaker, allow me to speak to these concessions, these custom exemptions that are going to be extended to the tourism stakeholders. If ever there was a time that tourism stakeholders needed assistance and the hand of the government to work hand in hand with these stakeholders in order to improve the tourism performance in Trinidad and Tobago, that time is now. Yes. Madam Speaker, the rest of the region is moving quickly as it relates to their development and their performance in tourism development, Madam Speaker. And we have to offer to all stakeholders here the necessary assistance. I must say that I am pleased by the work that I'm seeing done at Mount Irving Beach Hotel, the work being done also even at Radisson here in Trinidad, because we have a duty to improve not just the quantity but the quality of our room stock in order to improve, Madam Speaker, to enhance the quality of our product and to improve our attractiveness and our competitiveness as we compete here in a highly dynamic sector, Madam Speaker. So I cannot fathom, I cannot understand how any member, anybody who is patriotic about the development of Trinidad and Tobago, Madam Speaker, who is serious about the development of the tourism sector, come here and query offering customs duties, exemptions, and assistance to the sector. So, Madam Speaker, alongside these exemptions, the stakeholders would benefit from the government loan guarantee, that program that is now being extended by the government of Trinidad and Tobago to provide that necessary support for loan financing for these stakeholders so that they could expand their businesses, Madam Speaker. I want to speak also, Madam Speaker, because this goes alongside the custom exemptions. The reimbursement that would be granted to these stakeholders. When the small ones update their room and their rooms and their property, they are getting 40% back on their investment. And when the large ones update and improve their plans, they are getting 50%, and this runs alongside the custom duties. The Minister of Trade, along with the member for Couva North, would have also spoken about the new entities. And yes, in Tobago, you have a new CEO that was already brought on board for the Tobago Tourism Agency. And in Trinidad, we have already issued our advertisement for CEO. And we are also now working on the advertisements for the management positions. So we are moving ahead speedily, Madam Speaker, and I want to say that this government stands steadfastly with the tourism stakeholders, the tourism sector, in order to provide the necessary assistance. And anybody who questions that at this time, at this critical juncture in our development, cannot be serious about the development of the sector, and is downright unpatriotic. So, Madam Speaker, there are a number of issues that the member would have raised. But I wouldn't spend too much time on that. I hear constantly from those opposite about the missing millions. The law enforcement would do their work. The law enforcement authorities would do their work, and whoever is guilty would be, I look forward to seeing them pay for this, Madam Speaker. So I don't have any time to battle back and forth, but we as government are working with the stakeholders, working with the private sector hand in hand, and I want to stand here this afternoon to support these incentives towards the diversification and the development of the tourism sector, to re-energize the sector and to provide the necessary support to our stakeholders. So, Madam Speaker, I thank you.
Member for Miaro.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, for allowing me to join in this debate as we look at a motion, be it resolved that the House of Representatives, in accordance with and subject to the provisions of Section 56(1)(a) of the Customs Act, exempt from import duties of customs the classes of goods imported, entered for use in Trinidad and Tobago for the following purposes set out in the list of conditional duty exemptions in the third schedule. A, approved industry in Part A, subheading 1. B, approved agriculture, livestock, forestry, and fisheries in Part A, subheading 2. C, approved hotels in Part A, subheading 3. D, approved mining purposes in Part A, subheading 4. And E, other approved purposes in Part A, subheading 5. Madam Speaker, this is a rather straightforward bill having to do with these sections of the Customs Act, and in this specific instance, dealing with exemptions for the agriculture, tourism, mining, and obviously in the other motion to come later, the energy sector. This is a bill, Madam Speaker, that is in support of investment. Oh, sorry, this is a motion, sorry. This is a motion in support of investments and development. But more specifically, the idea here is really to support the private sector expansion and growth in all the areas aforementioned in Trinidad and Tobago as identified. Madam Speaker, none of us on this side have any problem with this motion because it is something that presents, yes, well, the motion I'm speaking of, that...
Members again, I would like to remind you all with respect to the standing order for members who are not speaking. Member for Miaro, please continue.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As I was saying, that we on this side has basically no problem because this is part of the continuance of government and the framework that this bill would have come from previous governments. This motion, sorry, would have come from previous governments to this one. And I can vividly recall that we came here in December of 2015 and we gave this motion an extension of 2 years. We are here again today, Madam Speaker, to further extend the life of these exemptions. But I would like the Minister to consider fixing these exemptions for a longer term or perhaps remove them totally. Yes, because we want it. We want it because we do feel at this time, any incentives to boost these sectors, specifically the agriculture and tourism, is sorely needed in our diversification drive at this time, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I say this since agriculture and tourism cannot be an afterthought in Trinidad and Tobago anymore. These two sectors, Madam Speaker, ought to be positioned as primary sectors, primary industries, as we attempt to navigate a new future here in Trinidad and Tobago. The stimulation of agriculture and tourism is absolutely critical, Madam Speaker, in the restructuring of our economy, especially now so in a declining energy market. In this particular case, Madam Speaker, we are being asked to support exemptions for equipment, material and supplies as we attempt to encourage greater participation in the sector. And I have absolutely no problem with that, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, my contribution today will focus primarily on the agricultural sector and its impact these exemptions would have provided over the past 24 months. And we will look and see if it has encouraged new participants, if it is encouraging new developments in the sector, and we can gauge how well that this government has been able to manage these exemptions in encouraging growth and development. I too, like my colleague here from Couva North, are a bit disappointed that the minister wasn't able to provide more data in terms of how has these sectors performed over the last 24 months based on the exemptions that we had extended in December 2015. The generalization is fine, but if we really want to see whether we need to increase the exemptions, increase the classes, look at a different type of exemption, perhaps in winding up the Minister of Trade would provide a bit more data in that area. So, Madam Speaker, agriculture, as was mentioned by the Minister, it contributes less than 5% of the national GDP. And in terms of employment, it employs less than 5% of the population. So having incentives, having exemptions in terms of increasing the participation is really needed in the 4 or 5 sectors that were mentioned. Foreign investment and trade, Madam Speaker, have really become very stagnated in this economy over the last 24 months. And while in the last 3 budget presentations, there is a desire to push and drive diversification, sadly, still it seems that we are still prefacing our future on the price of oil and natural gas, specifically in the petrochemical section. And although we have duties and we have exemption from duties and so on a lot of agricultural products and so on, we still see the focus by this government being on the petrochemical industry. Madam Speaker, rising food imports, our country, Trinidad and Tobago, still only produce about 8% of the required staple that we use. And when you combine that with an ever-increasing global food price index, the government must take steps right now, not later down the road, to prioritize agriculture in my respectful view. And this is something that I have keep mentioning in all my contributions, that the prioritization, in my view, has to be on agriculture as a way of diversifying our economy, not only at the diversification trust, but increasing the country's food security and obviously to provide sustainable and productive employment opportunities. And this is why we come to the House today to talk about these exemptions, because we want increased participation in the sector by private sector participants. Madam Speaker, in preparing for the motion today, I had a quick look at the presentations that I would have brought to this House over the last 24 months. And clearly, because the sector itself, in terms of agriculture, has remained very stagnated, I would have run the risk of plagiarizing myself, because I may have had to repeat the same thing over and over that I've had to do for the last 24 months, because there has been very little change in the status of the agricultural sector. And one would have hoped that when you put incentives, when you put these exemptions around this wide class of goods and services in the sector, we would have seen some interest, some new inertia in the industry. And Madam Speaker, that has not happened. And why do I say that, Madam Speaker? Up to today, farmers in this country, they still have the same challenges that they had in 2015. Land issues, land tenure, access roads. You still have farmers who have filed claims on these very same exemptions and subsidies, and up to today, they cannot get reimbursements for them. You do have farmers, thousands of them, who have filed claims because of flooding and so on over the last 24 months, and yet there have been no compensation and payment for these farmers. Even, look, we have our rice farmers, Madam Speaker. They, and thankfully, the Senator Ramdial has represented them lately, and they have been promised part of the $1.9 million that is owing to our rice farmers, perhaps before the end of the year. So on one hand, we are looking at exemptions, we are looking at these exemptions to encourage participation, but yet those who are participating actively, they are facing so much of challenges. So the net effect is that we are going nowhere in terms of the sector itself. Madam Speaker, today's motion, I want to look at our livestock and our livestock farmers, because the motion itself specifically speaks about incentives on livestock production. Agriculture, Madam Speaker, as a diversification method is much less of a tool to drive foreign exchange earnings, but it has a greater role in substitution, thus reducing the consumption of foreign exchange. So the more participants we have in the sector who are able to produce food, goods and services in the sector, it's less reliance in terms of our purchasing of foreign goods, foreign services in the sector. So we can save, while we may not earn a lot of foreign exchange, we are going to save the much needed foreign exchange that we need for other things like medicine and so on right now, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, our consumption of meat and dairy and poultry far exceeds our production capacity at this time. But when I speak to farmers, Madam Speaker, they will tell you that, listen, we can't do it. We can't give the type of production capacity that is needed to satisfy our local demands. But there are so many hindrances. And I'm of the view that if, as a Ministry of Trade, a lot of collaboration or more collaboration ought to be happening between the Ministry of Trade and the Ministry of Agriculture to see what are these impediments, what type of barriers that are affecting, and how can we use customs and excise and duties and grants and so on to really remove those barriers so our farmers can participate more in building the sector. Madam Speaker, therefore the right strategies, policies and incentives for the sector will have a huge impact on our ability to supply livestock demands. And while I will try my very best, Madam Speaker, not to incur the wrath of 48-1, in terms of moving too far away from the point of trade and tax exemptions and so on, it is important that we look at what is really impeding the livestock sector. In doing a bit of research for the motion today, Madam Speaker, I spoke to one of our country's brightest young agricultural scientists. His name is Riyad Mohammed. He has several degrees. He has a master's, and he's now reading for his PhD in terms of livestock. And, you know, sitting with him, and he told the story of the challenges in Trinidad and Tobago for livestock farmers. And I kind of put them into a few categories, and I just want to mention them. And when I mention them, I would like to see, I'd like the Minister of Trade really to take note, and perhaps in her conversation, in the Honourable Member's conversation with the Line Minister, perhaps see how best the Ministry of Trade can work with the Ministry of Agriculture to help fix some of these issues. Madam Speaker, for the benefit of my colleagues here who may not be familiar with a lot of the terminology in the sector of livestock, when they talk about small ruminants, you speak about things like sheep and goat, cattle, broilers, chicken layers, turkeys, and so on. And I was very surprised to learn that there were no livestock production extension services in Trinidad. And what that really is, Madam Speaker, the ministry does not have the requisite manpower at this time, apparently, to go to all 400 or 500 of our farmers and really train them a bit in finding the right methodology of you know, rearing and growing these animals in a safe way. And how do we use trade and exemptions and taxes and to allow more participation of private sector companies to fill that gap that clearly the Ministry of Agriculture is not able to attend to all 400 to 500 farmers in the country. Madam Speaker, and what I understand also is that in that section of the ministry, there are only 2 persons. And of that 2 persons, again, they are public servants and they work from 8 to 4. So really and truly, our livestock farmers really need the assistance of getting private sector to fill that gap, and perhaps finding some methodology of getting incentives going for private sector is really important to fill a piece of that gap in providing that service. Madam Speaker, I also understand one of the biggest challenge, and it may be very critical for the Ministry of Trade to look at offering incentives, is companies to develop to support the Ministry of Agriculture in the area of artificial insemination. Artificial insemination, Madam Speaker, is part of the agricultural sector industry development that has to happen to really deal or fill that gap that the ministry is not able to provide at this time. It is important to grow your livestock in terms of the speed that you want it to grow at, and in terms of dairy. Only pregnant cows can give milk. And if you don't have a robust artificial insemination program, then you really cannot deliver in terms of the type of quantity and the availability of the produce that you need. And you need a large bank of females. So, Madam Speaker, again, when we looked at what's happening in the sector, the gaps that are in the Ministry of Agriculture, we have to find ways through exemptions, through incentives, to create private sector that can fill that gap. I was told, Madam Speaker, that in terms of artificial insemination, there are only 2 persons, 2 units, one in north, one in south, and both units share 1 vehicle. And with that 1 vehicle, they only work from 8 to 4. So the farmers are telling me, Madam Speaker, that when the animals are in heat, 6 o'clock in the evening, nobody comes till 10 o'clock the next morning, and then you have to wait a 30-day cycle for it to happen again. So Madam Speaker, there is no way that, incentives that, as it stands today, is really helping that industry, that portion of the agricultural sector, if we don't encourage more private sector participation to fill those gaps. Madam Speaker, another broad area where we need private sector participation is in the availability of a generic stock for breeding across all the classifications of livestock. There are no dedicated multiplication farms with a constant supply of breeding females. Again, the Ministry of Agriculture does not have the capacity to do that right now based on the current systems that are in place. So it is now left up to the Ministry of Trade really to see how can they incentivize private sector participation to open these type of farms, bring the technology from away, get foreign participation to fill those gaps and really help push the industry forward, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this one falls squarely in the lap of the Ministry of Trade as well in terms of how do we protect our farmers, our livestock farmers, from the issue of dumping. Dumping is one of the prime issues that are really shutting our livestock farmers down. And this falls really in the area of trade where the monitoring of the type and quality of meats that are coming into the country, because what I've been told is that a lot of substandard type of meat sometimes come through our ports, and because of either the lack of manpower, will, attention to detail, sometimes these containers full of meat come through and it ends up on the shelves. Now, while I do know that there are vendors in Trinidad and Tobago that are very particular with when they bring their imported meats in, and a lot of those meats are certified by the US FDA, and I know they pass through very stringent routines getting here to Trinidad. There are those that come from other South American countries, parts of China and so on, which does not have that scrutiny. So the Ministry of Trade really has to perhaps do better to help support our local farmers, to protect whatever little market that they have locally, that they don't come under intense pressure from these imported livestock. And I also understand too, Madam Speaker, because of the trade that is now happening on the southwestern peninsula, a lot of meat is coming through Cedros and so on, in terms of wild meat and so on, that is flooding the market and then controlling these for diseases and so on. Because it's coming through illegally, it poses risk for even our citizens. So Madam Speaker, the role of the Ministry of Trade is absolutely important in terms of putting something in place that protects both the citizens and our livestock farmers. Madam Speaker, another huge area that the livestock farmers they experience, and perhaps the Ministry of Trade again may be able to offer some incentives and some solutions in filling that gap, is the issue of perennial larceny. Perennial larceny really...
Some liberty. But remember, what we're dealing here is customs duties. So I'm not going to allow you to venture into that unless you could tie it back to duties.
Yes, Madam Speaker. Thank you very much. I'd like to tie back perennial larceny in terms of the incentives that the Ministry of Trade can provide in the importation of security equipment and cameras and so on for farmers that they can use to protect their farms and so on. There are technologies that can be imported, Madam Speaker, in terms of securing your fence lines, your boundaries, so it can help in preventing the rustlers and so on from coming into your property. So Madam Speaker, this is where the Ministry of Trade really comes in terms of providing some of these incentives, putting the classification of security equipment so that farmers can invest a bit in securing their own livestock, their own products within their own property, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Ministry of Trade, in terms of being able to control the cost of food supplies, or what you call the stock food, the stock ingredients for livestock farmers. Right now, that's one of the most expensive components in terms of the process. We may have to ask, we may have to look at some heavier incentives in terms of discounts, in terms of reduction in customs duties and so on, for a lot of the food that has to go into some of these farms, because we don't make any of the foods right here in Trinidad for these animals, Madam Speaker. What we have to do, we have to buy portions of the product and then we do the mixing here, and that runs the cost up. So that is another area that I would like the Minister of Trade to look at in terms of how can we bring the cost for these raw materials down for our livestock farmers so they can have a better chance at being competitive on the market. Another challenge that we're having in terms of our livestock farmers, Madam Speaker, is the fact that there is no marketing agency, like how our produce farmers have...
Speaker, Madam Speaker, please, 48-1. He was going good.
So, member, I uphold the objection. Please come back.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in terms of what I'm trying to get at, Madam Speaker, in order to fill some of the gaps that are facing the farmers, Madam Speaker, there are things that the Ministry of Trade can exercise their power in the ability to manage the cost of imports into the country. It is really identifying which parts of those gaps that the Ministry of Trade can make some effort in. And this is what I'm attempting to do in terms of bringing these issues to the Parliament. And thankfully, the Minister is here, so she gets it firsthand. And she can, the Honourable Member can really put it in her discussions when she meets with technocrats in the various ministries and so on. So,
to what is before us, okay? You still have to confine that to what is actually before us.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, those are some of the areas that I feel that with a bit of care and attention that the Ministry of Trade can really strengthen in terms of its exemptions, in terms of making a better environment for our agriculture sector. So, Madam Speaker, with those few words, I just want to touch just quickly on a bit of the piece on the tourism part. Obviously, as you know, Mayaro, as a constituency, is heavily dependent on our tourism. And, you know, I'm very glad to support these types of incentives in terms of how do we encourage more participants in terms of hotels, in terms of guest houses, and so on. But, Madam Speaker, Mayaro has so much more capacity in terms of what we have in terms for our guests. And I do hope that besides just hotels and beds and so on, we can look at getting the ministry to get itself a bit involved in encouraging community tourism so we can grow our individual communities. It's going to help
Madam
all
Speaker,
of the...
Standing Order 48-1.
Okay, a member, again, I uphold it. If you look, the motion deals with approve hotels in Part A, subhead 3. And that is very specific. It's not really about tourism. It's with respect to hotels. So I'll confine you to what subhead 3 deals with.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I look forward to see private sector participation in encouraging the growth and development of hotels, more guest houses in the Mayaro constituency, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, before I wrap up, I would like to, on behalf of the people of Mayaro, I would like to wish you, Madam Speaker, the staff of the Parliament, my parliamentary colleagues in the House here, and obviously the people of Trinidad and Tobago, I want to wish everyone a Merry Christmas and a bright and prosperous 2018. Thank you very much.
Member for St. Joseph.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. As I rise at 3:24 to join the debate on this motion, to consider sections 56(1)(a) of the Customs Act, to exempt from import duties of customs the classes of goods imported and entered for use in Trinidad and Tobago for the following purposes set out in the list of conditional duty exemptions in the 3rd schedule to the Customs Act. Madam Speaker, these exemptions are in direct relationship to our Vision 2030 plan. Many hearts, many voices, one vision. Talking about achieving a developed country status by the year 2030. And our broad socio-economic framework talks our long-term development goals. And theme 4 of Vision 2030 speaks about building globally competitive businesses. That is what this is about. Giving exemptions to import duties so that companies in the different sectors can become globally competitive. Madam Speaker, I want to commend the member of Mayaro for many parts of his presentation. I think from time to time he forgets that he's actually PNM, because very often he did sound this morning, today, and congratulating us on this side. So I want to congratulate him on that. Madam Speaker, the member for Couva North wanted justification, wanted data, and spoke about a lot of things. Madam Speaker, if one goes to the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago and one looks at our balance of trade for the past many quarters, one could see that our balance of trade in recent years peaked in January 2015 at $1 billion. There started a gradual decline, and it went into negative territory. In the first quarter of 2017, from the previous quarter of minus $360 million US, we rebounded, made up that lost territory, and went to a positive balance of trade of $307.8 million. That is data that justifies what we are doing here today. If members opposite, as the Attorney General and the member for Digger Martin Northeast will always say, if members will just prepare and read, the data is there. So it's there. Madam Speaker, some of the industries that benefit from these tax exemptions, I don't want to call their names, but under manufacturing, the revenue foregone for the period January 1, December 31 is $452,724,422.38. 452,724,422.38. That is your revenue foregone. But, yeah, for 2016. So that's the last time we have data for entire year for manufacturing. But when you look at the companies that benefit, I don't want to call the companies' names or what they actually receive. But it spans biscuit manufacturing, 7.9 million. Chemicals, 452,000. Indian spices, 2 companies collectively, one company 112,365, another one 270,919. That is a justification. Because you see, that contributes when we bring in those imports, when we bring in that equipment, you can manufacture here, satisfy your local market, and then export. And the data will tell you that our balance of trade recovered from minus $360 million to positive $307.8 million. That is the data. That is the justification. What are some of the other companies that benefit from this? Paints, snacks, labels, household chemicals. A person I know well, I won't call his name. Meat, concrete products, milks and juices, cement. Other sectors that benefit from this are the meat companies that produce chicken, beef, pork. Other companies that benefit, hotels, energy companies that benefit to the tune of $19,539,126.33. But these tax exemptions to the energy sector, you know what the positive thing is? After years of hearing from the last Minister of Energy that the reason for our drop in gas production was due to maintenance, which we know turned out not to be right. Gas production is now stabilizing and showing a slight increase due to fields like Juniper.
Madam Speaker, 48.1, this has nothing to do with this motion. If he wants to come back in his second motion, fine.
I would hope members have looked at what Part 1, the list of conditional exemptions under Part A. Okay? There is here approved mining purposes in Part A, subhead 4. Maybe if members look at it, they might see the relevance of it remembered. Please continue, St. Joseph.
And that is mining, yes. Yes. Gas. You are mining gas. My Lord, you all ran this country for 5 years.
I have ruled. Please continue.
Madam Speaker, what is amazing is, right. Anyhow, so Madam Speaker, the member for Couva North had the temerity to speak about the air bridge between Trinidad and Tobago. I will respond just to that comment. I'm not going to open the debate. It was your government that took $1 billion cash and bought those duds of airplanes called ATRs for the Tobago-Trinidad run. It was your government that did that, not us. I'll leave that alone. And not only that, you waived the rights for remedy for defects. You did that. You did that. Madam Speaker, I had no intention of joining this debate, but Couva North really, and I congratulate her on the birth of a child and welcome her back to the Parliament. But Madam Speaker, what these measures seek to do of exemptions is to release the entrepreneurial spirit of Trinidadians and Tobagonians. And we have to start with these exemptions to start to move away from the typical buy and sell model which we inherited. Many of these industries that benefit from tax exemptions are entrepreneurs in their own rights. And we have to continue supporting them, because the old factors of production now include entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurs, like the people who run some of these soft drink companies that are benefiting from these tax exemptions. One of my favorite to use as an example of entrepreneurship, in the year 2016, got $3.6 million worth of tax exemptions. And that company is a particularly entrepreneurial company. They are not afraid of risk. They will take risk. They will go into markets where they never went before. And that is what these exemptions are meant to do. So, Madam Speaker, in my very short intervention today, I want to congratulate the Minister of Trade and Industry. I want to congratulate her for aligning this with Vision 2030. This is a very important way to move this country to developed country status, and I look forward to the rest of the debate, and I recommend these exemptions. Thank you very much.
Minister of Trade and Industry.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And I, too, would like to congratulate the member for Couva North on the arrival of her second baby, a baby girl. But obviously, the member is quite upset that she cannot benefit from the baby grant. And I would like her to... No, okay. What I want you to do is to meet with the Minister of Social Development. You can get some kind of social assistance there to buy your baby. So,
Minister of Trade and Industry, I just ask you to not go down that road and please continue your presentation.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. But let me just advise her that breast milk is better than purchased milk. Okay. Madam Speaker, this motion is strictly about customs exemptions. And I stayed clear of any depth in terms of diversification and other areas because I simply wanted to confine my presentation to the customs duty exemptions. I would give a little bit of detail to some of the questions raised, though. With regard to tourism, the member for Couva North wanted some information on those hotels which were able to benefit from the customs exemption. And I can just tell you, there were just four companies, four hotels: the Bella Forma Resorts Limited, Mount Irving Bay Hotel, the Royal Hotel, and the Turtle Beach by Tex Resorts. And the quantum of customs duties exempted for the period January to 2016 to July 31st, 2017 would have been $670,000. You also wanted a little bit more data. I will tell you that the level of customs exemption with regard to agriculture and livestock, I had mentioned in my presentation that 8 companies would have benefited, and the value of the exemptions would have been $15.7 million TT dollars. With regard to manufacturing, the member for St. Joseph did indicate some figures. Well, for the same period, January 1, 2016, but this time to July 31st, 2017, the exemptions would have added to about 700 million TT dollars. And with regard to mining, we had no request at all for customs exemption. And, but with regard to manufacturing, we did do a correlation of those who benefited from the exemption and exports, because that's our primary interest as an earner of foreign exchange and as an earner of foreign exchange. And I said it in my presentation that we looked at the year ended September 2017, and the export levels are rising out of some of those customs duties that were exempted would have been 3.6 billion TT dollars. So from that you can glean that it has quite been valuable in terms of our export levels. Sorry, sure?
Thank you. In the exemptions for the imported products, could you give us a little appreciation of the import bill for the manufacturing sector, if you have any information on that? In other words, you have 3.6 billion for export, but do you have how much is imported to create that 3.6 billion for export?
I'm sorry, Member for Caranese, I don't have that figure with me, but I can always provide it. But I was speaking about the quantum of the exemptions, and under the category Other, which is for boats and navigation equipment, sports and recreation activities, the exemptions would have totaled $1.7 million. So I think that gives you some kind of idea of the level of activity. Again, I don't want to go into too much detail on tourism. I think the minister would have answered you, the member who has responsibility for tourism. I mean, the debate is not about sandals and jazz and missing money and that kind, and transport between the two countries at all. It's really strictly about the exemptions. But I did address in my presentation the question of reforms in the industry. At least I gave you that. I told you of the upgrade of the institutional, the regulatory, and the marketing systems, and with the introduction of the separate agencies for Trinidad and Tobago as well. And I did speak to the potential of the sector in terms of its ability to be a key foreign exchange earner and so on. And I gave you the commitment of our government to marketing our natural resources and our beautiful country. And I leave the rest in the hands of the member who has responsibility for the Ministry of Tourism. You spoke extensively, I think would have been the member for Mayaro and yourself, and the member for Coven North, about the participation of the private sector. And I want to say that it is very, very gratifying, the level of participation by the private sector. And this is not the place, but at another time I will detail the level of investments that are taking place at this time and that we foresee into 2018-2019 by our local private sector. The relationship between the private sector and the government has strengthened under this government, and it continues to be beneficial to both sides and of course our economy. And of course, all of these duty exemptions that we spoke of today will incentivize, along with the other incentives that are available to the private sector as well. And all of this will lead to greater overall investments. Someone raised I think it was the member for Coven North would have raised the question about exemptions for the fishing industry. And I can only ask you, I can only draw your attention to the total list of major incentives that are available to all sectors, and in particular to the fishing sector. It's all laid out in the document. It had been put into the press lately. It's available on the Ministry of Agriculture, on the Ministry of Agriculture's website, and all of the incentives with regard to fuel, for the purchase of gasoline, diesel, engine oil, the replacement of pirogues, other multi-purpose vessels, for, incentives for upgrading commercial vessels, incentives for packaging material, for post-harvest equipment. All of those are listed on the website. There are numerous incentives. The member from Mayaro also raised that. There are numerous incentives for the agricultural sector in terms of land preparation, machinery and equipment, soil conservation, incentives related to crops and citrus, cocoa establishment, etc., waste management, post-harvest and marketing, livestock. You talked about livestock, member for Mayaro. It's all there. livestock rebates available for pastures, for fodder bands, for housing and infrastructure, for milking systems. This is for cattle and buffalo, or for goat and sheep as well. So it's extensive, and this is not the place for me to list all of these, but again, it's available, it's out there in the public domain, available on the website of the Ministry of Agriculture, Lands and Fisheries. I mean, you talked about diversification. Again, I think our reduced revenue streams, of course, just to have a greater focus on diversification. But this is not the place for going into that. The individual ministries and ministers, the Minister of Agriculture, Lands and Fisheries, the Minister of Tourism, the Ministry of Finance with regard to the financial products, Ministry of Trade and Industry, all of these ministries have intensified their efforts towards this diversification process and roadmap, and many of the ministries have already elaborated on their programs. I certainly did in my presentation about some of the programs that I've already introduced, including the grant fund facility for the manufacturing and agro-processing industries for small and medium-sized businesses, the research and development facility, which deals with, which takes you from feasibility to product development to commercialization. I spoke about Exim Bank's improved capacity to provide trade financing and discounting arrangements for exporters. I spoke about the capitalization of Exim Bank to the tune of US $100 million to allow manufacturers and exporters to access raw materials and other essential inputs. I spoke about the $50 million business development incentive program. All of these are incentives to support the manufacturing sector, and many of them are also to support the agribusiness and agro-processing sectors as well. Thank you, Member for Mayoro, for your very sensible contribution. From the point of view, you stated very clearly that you approve of all of these incentives. You obviously see the benefit. I thank you for that. And just to say to you, not going down the road of energy at all, just to say that the oil and gas sectors will always be relevant. It's our natural resource, and there's much of it to be exploited, and therefore they will remain relevant to our economy. And you always have to remember that we do have developed in Trinidad and Tobago a very large downstream sector, and which contributes to our economy as well. And all of these industries will remain relevant as we go forward, and even as we press on with all of our other diversification efforts. As I said, the diversification roadmap is very clear, and we will continue to speak to the population and introduce all of our programs as we go on. You mentioned a bit about the NFM situation with regard to rice payments. And again, I'm pleased to confirm that the Minister of Agriculture was able to state that $1 million would have been paid to the farmers by today. And I feel certain that this would have been done with the rest, and the Ministry of Agriculture is going to give attention to the rest of it as well. Support for farmers is very important to this government, and in particular the Ministry of Agriculture and Agricultural Lands and Fisheries. You spoke again about collaboration. This is again the MP for Mayoro. You spoke about substantial collaboration needed between both ministries of Agriculture, Lands and Fisheries, and the Ministry of Trade and Industry. Again, I mean, this is clearly, during my presentation, I spoke about the Maruga Park, and that's an example where we are, in fact, collaborating with the Ministry of Agriculture. We are providing the economic space for agribusiness, and we hope that this is just a template. This is just the first of many other parks that would be available for agro-processing and agribusiness as these industries are developed as we go along. And again, some of the programs which I spoke to earlier with regard to the $25 million grant facility, it is for the development of not only manufacturing businesses, but also for agro-processing and agribusiness as well, and for small and medium-sized businesses. And again, we spoke about the private sector. And I have already established that a great relationship exists. There was some, you raised a concern, Member for Mayoro, about the entry of meats into Trinidad and Tobago, and that the Ministry of Trade and Industry has a role here. I want to tell you that that's not so. All entry, any meats entering Trinidad and Tobago, permits are given by the Ministry of Agriculture, Lands and Fisheries. We have no jurisdiction over that. And of course, it's the Customs and Excise that have monitoring responsibility at the level of the ports and what comes in and so on. So we don't, but of course the Ministry of Consumer Affairs, the Division of Consumer Affairs would take the responsibility of monitoring in supermarkets what's on the shelves, whether or not it's, and of course whether or not it's, in the case of meats and so on, whether or not it's fit for consumption, whether they had been compliant as expected, and there's a relationship also with the Ministry of Health to ensure that the right thing is done. And again, I think pretty much those are the concerns that of relevance to the debate and on the motion. And just to say in closing that all of these exemptions really will enable the business environment to be more competitive in terms of quality and efficiency, and also these will also facilitate growth in all of the sectors which we spoke to today. The measure, together with other initiatives undertaken by the government, will position us to achieve our common objectives, which is the promotion of export-led growth, the creation of more industries, and of course the creation of high-value products as well, the generation of additional foreign exchange and sustainable employment opportunities. I therefore beg to move, Madam Speaker.
Honourable members, the question is, be it resolved that the House of Representatives, in accordance with and subject to the provisions of Section 56 of the Customs Act, exempt from import duties of customs the classes of goods imported or entered for use in Trinidad and Tobago for the respective purposes set out in the list of conditional duty exemptions in the third schedule to the Customs Act for A, approve agriculture, livestock, forestry and fisheries in Part A, subhead Roman numeral 2. B, approve hotels in Part A, subhead Roman numeral 3. C, approve mining purposes in Part A, subhead Roman numeral 4. And D, other approved purposes in Part A, subhead Roman numeral 5, for the period beginning 1st January 2018 and ending 31st of December 2020. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? I think the ayes have it. Minister of Trade and Industry.
Madam Speaker, I beg to move the following motion standing in my name. Whereas Section 56(1)(a) of the Customs Act, Chapter 7801, of the House of Representatives may, from time to time by resolution, provide that any class of goods specified in the resolution shall be exempt from import duties of customs if the goods are imported or entered for use by any person for any purpose specified in the resolution during any period to be fixed by the Minister in each particular case, not being a period terminating later than the date prescribed in the resolution as the last day on which such exemption shall be operative, and subject to such conditions as the Minister may impose. And whereas, by legal notice number 217 of 2015, the last resolution in respect of the goods identified therein came into effect on 1st January 2016 and shall expire on 31st December 2017. And whereas it is expedient that certain goods continue to be exempt from import duties of customs as of 1st January 2018, be it resolved that the House of Representatives, in accordance with and subject to the provisions of Section 56 of the Customs Act, exempt from import duties of customs the class of goods specified in the first column of the schedule, being goods imported or entered for use for the purposes specified in the third column, but that this resolution shall cease to have effect in respect of any class of goods specified in the first column that is manufactured in Trinidad and Tobago. And I make reference to the first column, and being the class of goods, equipment, material, and supplies, and the purposes for which goods are to be used, for imported for use in offshore petroleum exploration and petroleum operations, with the period exemption from 1st January 2018 to 31st December 2020. Madam Speaker. Again, this motion is strictly about customs exemption, and I will confine my presentation to that. Madam Speaker, the purpose of the motion is to seek an extension of the benefits granted pursuant to Section 56(1)(a) of the Customs Act. This coverage has been afforded to the offshore petroleum exploration and petroleum operations sector since 1970. This is also to allow subcontractors and service providers the use of this particular benefit. The domestic energy industry stretches across a range of upstream, midstream, and downstream activities, including the exploration and production of oil and gas, pipeline operations and distribution, and the production of a wide range of petrochemicals. As a government, we continue to act strategically across the entire value chain, which includes provision of the benefit now being discussed. Today, our success in the energy sector is globally acknowledged. The petroleum sector has generated substantial contributions to the country's GDP and to employment over time. Notwithstanding, there is intrinsic vulnerability in the sector, which is hinged on both external and internal factors, and today the resultant challenges are ours to bear for the time being. Madam Speaker, the energy sector faces a very positive outlook based on a number of new gas projects, which activities have already commenced and will continue into the next 2 or 3 years. Madam Speaker, Trinidad and Tobago continues to attract strong investment from large multinationals despite the vagaries of the international energy environment. This is clear evidence that companies have confidence in the long-term viability of the energy sector in Trinidad and Tobago. This resolution has supported existing companies' decisions to continue to invest and further their exploration and production activities despite uncertainties. During the period January 1st, 2016 to July 31st, 2017, 6 major energy-related companies benefited from customs duty exemptions under the existing resolution, being able to acquire equipment and raw materials at internationally competitive prices and without the customs duties. Madam Speaker, the Ministry of Trade and Industry has consulted with the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries, who are also of the view that the incentives under Section 56(1)(a) of the Customs Act are essential to facilitating new as well as existing investments in the energy sector and therefore must be continued. We are aware that the continuation of this benefit will result in some revenue loss for the government. However, this must be evaluated against the benefits to be gained from revitalizing and encouraging investments in our energy industry. Madam Speaker, it is the people of Trinidad and Tobago who will benefit in the long run. I beg to move.
Honourable members, I will now propose the question for debate. Be it resolved that the House of Representatives, in accordance with and subject to the provisions of Section 56 of the Customs Act, exempt from import duties of customs the class of goods specified in the first column of the schedule, being goods imported or entered for use for the purpose specified in the third column, but that this resolution shall cease to have effect in respect of any class of goods specified in the first column that is manufactured in Trinidad and Tobago. Schedule. First column, class of goods, equipment, material, and supplies. Second column, purposes for which goods are to be used, imported for use in offshore petroleum exploration and petroleum operations. Third column, period of exemption from 1st January 2018 to 31st of December 2020. Member for point of view.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And it's an honor to rise to debate this motion that the Minister of Trade just moved in this House. And I'm very happy to see the Minister of Trade back in his House after a 2-year absence, I think the last time she piloted these same two motions was on December 11th, 2015. So I don't know if that is a reason that for the last 2 years, the Ministry of Trade has been really non-existent, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, again, I would like to have a conversation with you. I'm hearing crosstalk already. Madam Speaker, these two motions, this motion, especially this motion, the second motion, was identical motion that the Minister of Trade moved here.
Excuse me. We are debating one motion. Number 2. Confine. Yep. All right, please.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. That was just a slip of the tongue by saying the two motions. So, Madam Speaker, I'm referring to motion number 2 that was just moved by the Minister of Trade in respect of the energy concessions, duties on energy. Madam Speaker, the Minister of Trade brought this same motion 2 years ago on December 11, 2015. The only difference between the motion on December 11, 2015 and this motion today is there's a variation of time period. The one that she bought on December 11th was for a period of 2 years that is expiring on December 31st at the end of this month. She has now brought a motion to extend the same resolution for a further 3 years. I did not hear in her presentation why the extension of 3 years, Madam Speaker. And also I want to refer, I agree with her that this motion, the Honourable Senator, this motion has gone back even as far back in a budget debate in December 1968 by then Prime Minister Eric Williams, who brought this in his budget debate of bringing these custom duties exemptions. And it was passed in March 1970, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I just want to refer to the Honourable Minister when she piloted this motion on December 11th, December 2011. And I quote from her Hansard, then, page 72, Hansard on 11th December 2015. I want to let you know that the Ministry of Trade and Industry is currently reviewing the efficiency of the concessions regime. Based on our records, approximately 800 companies have been granted concessions since the passage of this provision. However, based on the current records, only 145 companies actually utilized the concession in 2014. Of course, only 7 were energy companies. So obviously, we want to examine closely to see how relevant the concessions are as well. That was her quote when she moved this identical motion on December 11th, 2015, Madam Speaker. Today she comes here and she comes with nothing to respond to this motion, this presentation she made in 2015, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the Senator, the Honourable Minister, again in that contribution, and I want to quote her, but we have been reviewing electronic records and we want to make sure that the concessionaires actually utilize the concessions for their intended use and purpose. In particular, the items allowed for duty-free treatment are not allowed to enter the domestic market for resale or other uses. Let me give you the assurance that over the next 2 years, this is in December 11, 2015, the Ministry of Trade and Industry, we intend to review all operations of all concessions to ensure that the use of these duty-free licenses adhere to their conditions of use. Madam Speaker, today we have heard nothing about that. Madam Speaker, I want to give another quote in her Hansard on the same time. Page 31 of the Hansard, December 11, 2015, by the Minister of Trade and Industry. And I quote her, "This exemption will make the environment more attractive and foster growth within the sector," Madam Speaker. To date, we have not heard anything about that. attractive and growth in that energy sector, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, while this is a very simple resolution that the Minister of Trade has brought here, I want to say that, and while we are in agreement of it, as a continuation, because over the past, I think over the past 47 years, different governments have extended and approved this particular motion of the duty-free concessions, Madam Speaker. But we should not come here to Parliament to rubber stamp anything that this government has brought here today, Madam Speaker. The Minister of Trade owes it to the country to really come after 2 years and explain to us in this Parliament how this concession has worked in the past 2 years. She has presented nothing this afternoon, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I would like to ask the Minister of Trade what impact these exemptions have had on the national economy in the past 2 years. I also like to ask her, what has been the impact of these exemptions on the energy sector in the past 2 years, Madam Speaker? Because it is very pertinent and real that the country understands, because she rightly said that we are giving up revenues in the duty-free concessions, but we also have the possibility of generating other revenues by giving up these duty-free concessions. And I agree with her. Madam Speaker, I also like to ask the Minister of Trade in the past 2 years, what was the opportunity cost in this duty-free concession? Madam Speaker, because I was hoping that when she came here today, she would have brought the opportunity cost of how many jobs were generated in the past 2 years by these duty-free concessions, how many, what was the cost of the duty-free concessions, and what production increase came about by these duty-free concessions. Because you see, Madam Speaker, it is all well and good to assist the government in helping the economy and generating, and the other question I would like to ask is how many FDIs have come into the country in the last 2 years based on these duty-free concessions. So I'm hoping in her winding up, she can be able to give us those sort of answers, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, it is very critical that the energy sector really moves this country. As we well know that the energy sector is really the life of this country. And on one hand, we have the duty-free concessions. On the other hand, in the budget presentations by the Honorable Minister of Finance, he has been talking about incentivizing the energy sector, Madam Speaker. He has gone back as far when he was in opposition that he talked about the need for incentivizing the energy sector to really take this country to a different level. And I want to quote when he was in opposition. This is the Minister of Finance presently. And it was at a Rotary Club presentation, Port of Spain Club, Madam Speaker. And he really talked about at the time when he was in opposition that Port of Spain, Rotary Club of Port of Spain. He talked about really incentivizing, basically, I'm ad-libbing now, incentivizing the economy, and when they get back into government, this was, I think, was in November 2014, when they get back into government, he will really ensure that they incentivize the energy sector. Madam Speaker, in his past budget presentation, he also repeated that. But to date, we on the opposition side are yet to see any tangible incentivization by this government and the Minister of Finance. So I ask, is it just old talk that the Minister of Finance is talking? Then on the one hand, Madam Speaker, we have these duty-free concessions to generate companies to Trinidad. And on the other hand, we recently heard in his budget presentation on October the 5th, he talked about a royalty tax, Madam Speaker. And that royalty tax was supposed to take place on December the 1st, 2017, Madam Speaker. Today,
Madam Speaker, point of order 48.1. This is about customs duties, nothing to do with royalty.
Honourable Member for Point of Order, I will give you a little leeway. I want to remind you, this is very, very narrow debate. So please, if whatever you're going to say, if you bring it back to what is contained in the schedule, equipment, material, supplies, imported for use offshore.
I'm guided, Madam Speaker, but my point is really and truly that the Honourable Minister of Trade talked about giving up revenues by these duty-free concessions, and with the hope that they will generate income from companies coming in, either via taxation or whatever, or job creation. And there we have the Honourable Minister of Finance in his budget presentation talking about a royalty tax for the same energy companies.
Just told you that I ruled that out of order. Please move on to the next point.
I'll move on, Madam Speaker. Thank you. I'm guided, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, you know, when we listen again to the Minister of Trade, she came here this afternoon with nothing tangible based on what she would have said in the last 2 years, in December 11. And I want to also ask the Minister of Trade and Industry, what was the impact of these concessions? And in another way, I want to ask, the companies that get these concessions, are they really using it in the right way and not coming back in the domestic market and getting away from paying the correct amount of duties? And if all the companies that apply and get this duty-free concession, Madam Speaker, in Trinidad and Tobago, and all are following, you know, based on the minister not coming here to give that information today, and all of, you know, and every one of them are above the law, then that augurs well for the business people of Trinidad and Tobago, because we tend to make the business people the bad ones, Madam Speaker. But if all these energy companies and service companies are doing the right thing by these duty-free concessions, I think the Minister of Trade should really go out there and really PR and do a good job of acknowledging these companies, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, you know, when we come back under our partnership, you know, we had so many different incentives, Madam Speaker. The People's Partnership, right? When we were in government, Madam Speaker, I'm having a conversation again. I don't know what the Attorney General. Madam Speaker, when the People's Partnership was in government, we created a lot of incentives to really grow the energy sector. And one of the incentives was based on a capital development where oil firms were allowed to write off capital, offer their capital allowances. And this present government has attacked us for that. And out of that, Madam Speaker, we were able to create the Juniper and the Angeline, Madam Speaker. And I want to just talk about the Juniper a little bit, Madam Speaker, because the Juniper platform was really based on the Minister of Trade concessions with the duty-free, because the Juniper platform was allowed to bring in equipment and materials, duty-free concession. And the BPTT, the Trinidad and Tobago was able to build that platform, according to the BPTT release, within budget and within time, Madam Speaker. But you know what happened? The next platform was supposed to be the Angeline platform. And BPTT took that platform to Mexico to be built, Madam Speaker. So if these duty-free, under this government, so if these duty-free concessions were so good, Madam Speaker, why did BPTT move that platform to Mexico? Because in these times that we live in right now, Madam Speaker, I am sure the workers who would have built the Juniper platform would have gone over to the Angeline platform. And in this Christmas season, they would have been able to get an income for their families at this time of the year, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, these are the same incentives that the Minister of Trade talked about. It works in some and it doesn't work in others, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, I really don't have much to add than these things because I gave an undertaking to my colleague on the other side. I gave an undertaking to my colleague on the other side that I had some points to make. I think I made it. And I really want to say in closing, Madam Speaker, this resolution was touted as one to push our energy sector forward. However, the entire scope of our economy, this one is one of the most menial steps in propelling our energy sector forward, Madam Speaker. If our energy sector is to prosper, this resolution must go hand in hand with policies which inspire confidence in the economy.
Correct.
Policies which inspire companies to invest and explore. Policies which create an environment that makes it easy for firms to operate within. All of this, the PNM has failed to do in the past 2 years, Madam Speaker. They have lacked the vision to create an energy map to forecast where they want our energy sector to be in the long term. And, Madam Speaker, it is easy to support this resolution, but one must question, is it enough to keep our sector from falling apart, given the neglect and absence of vision it has faced in the past 2 years? Madam Speaker, I thank you.
Mr. Fernando West.
Madam Speaker, I am literally compelled by virtue of the contribution coming from my dear friend, the Honourable Member for Pointe-a-Pierre, to join in this debate. I propose to just simply address the very sharp issues pointed by my learned colleague in as succinct a fashion as possible. Madam Speaker, we're speaking about the concessions under the Customs Act, Chapter 7801, as they specifically relate to the class of goods, equipment, material, and supplies for use in offshore petroleum exploration, petroleum operations, and for a specific period, January 2018 to December 2020. I listened to my learned colleague, the Honourable Member for Pointe-a-Pierre, introduced into Trinidad and Tobago's discussion that the last government gave capital allowances and took an initiative which resulted in the Juniper and Angeline projects. I'd like to say, Madam Speaker, there is in fact truth in that statement. Thank you very much. And as with all things that are put forward, the question is whether it is the whole truth in terms of the discussion before us.
Thank you very much.
You see, Madam Speaker, we hear it in court. When you're obliged to take the oath in the court, you start off by saying, I'll tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, as the American oath goes. Trinidad, we have a slightly different oath. But, Madam Speaker, in getting to the whole truth and nothing but the truth, as it relates to the economic discussion on the customs duties that we're talking about here, it is important to note that the position of requesting further extension of these Section 56 concessions under the Customs Act are brought into sharp focus because it is as a result of a failure on the part of the last government to cap the deferred liability taxation rollover that the whole truth comes into context. And let me explain that. It is one thing to give the concession under Section 56. It is one thing to get the customs duties given away under Section 56 as the resolution proposes. But, Madam Speaker, when you take that ability for the capital write-off and you add it to the ability to take deferred losses on a continuous basis go forward, you end up in the position of catastrophe that the UNC caused in Trinidad and Tobago. And the catastrophic consequence is the very reason why this resolution asks us to carry on the waiver for 3 years. Because, Madam Speaker, the loss of 96% of our revenue in the oil plantation, the gas plantation that our economy is, that loss of 96% of our revenue was directly attributed to the whole truth of the UNC's decision, not only as it relates to the capital expenditure write-off, but the failure to put a cap on the deferred taxation liability go forward. And therefore, when we see a return to taxation from one of the largest oil and gas producers in Trinidad and Tobago happening only in 2025, let me repeat that. We are at zero contribution for taxation under the decision of the last government. 96% of our revenue has disappeared for the country. As we speak this month, we're lucky if we make salaries. We're lucky if we make pensions. We're lucky if we make disability grants and then goods and services. We're in that position because the last government failed to put a cap on the carry forward of liabilities. And if it were not for the genius of the Minister of Finance and the Cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago in imposing a royalty tax at the wellhead, we'd be in trouble. Madam Speaker, the Honourable Member for Pointe-a-Pierre. And you'll notice there's a lot of buzzing opposite me, Madam Speaker, because the truth is hard to swallow when it is put in the context of the whole truth and nothing but the truth. But Madam Speaker,
we're getting a long discourse on Angeline and etc. This has nothing to do with the narrow interpretation of the bill.
I'll allow you a little leeway just to answer what I allowed from the member of Pointe-a-Pierre. But please, Attorney General, I would not allow this to be a debate on either the state of the economy or the energy sector.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's hard for NAPRIMA to follow a debate of this sort of context, so I'll try to connect as I go, because I'm squarely within the confines of the resolution before us, as I have pointed to and will continue to point to. And I'm answering the member, and I'm on to my next point. Madam Speaker, we heard the Honourable Member for Pointe-a-Pierre talk about the need for an income. We heard the Honourable Member, as he was coming to a wind-up, talk about the need for policies, for investment to be identified if exploration is to take off. The Honourable Member talked about the need for an energy map, where the sector will be. I'd like to put on the record in square response to what the Honourable Member put forward. If I'm not mistaken, the so-called partnership, because I can't identify a membership in the partnership, save the UNC, because we heard recently that there's only one faction inside of there. I mean, the political leader of the COP herself said that there's no entity in there. But when we come to the answer on the policies relative to investment and the need for an energy map, if I'm not mistaken, after 5 years and 3 months of the UNC government, we didn't have a master gas plan in this country, if I'm not mistaken. After 5 years and 3 months and hundreds of billions of dollars, we did not have any address to the gas shortage that caused the crippling of the Point Lisas industrial estate and the mass exodus of companies in this country, which has a direct impact upon employment issues. In fact, in answering the request of the Honourable Member for an energy map, I wish to openly compliment the Honourable Prime Minister himself for leading the charge on shoring up the gas shortfall by going to the Bolivian Republic of Venezuela to ensure that gas is brought on to encourage the stoppage of the exodus of companies. So, Madam Speaker, I think it unfortunate that honorable colleagues opposite insist on forgetting the formula of the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I think it unfortunate that my learned colleagues opposite cannot appreciate the recovery of the economy and the need for ensuring that a stable environment exists by firstly providing for... Madam Speaker, could you ask Oropuch East to make something other than noise? Could you ask him?
Attorney General, what I think is direct your conversation this way and don't be distracted. Please continue.
I do confess that babble and noise does cause distraction, but I thank you. I know Oropuch East is one to both of these things. Anyway, Madam Speaker, you wish to make a contribution? You have anything to say?
Direct your contribution.
Madam Speaker.
While I understand the banter, I want us to not be less. I want us to be more parliamentary and not be frivolous. Okay? Attorney General,
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, the need for the extension of this concession under Section 56 of the Customs Act is clear. The period requested up to 2020 is indeed an ample period only for addressing the situation of the disaster that was created by the last government in causing a collapse in the revenue of Trinidad and Tobago. The revenue to be foregone under this incentive under Section 56 is a necessary loss in terms of a taxation loss. The benefit to be provided by the approval of this resolution is an obvious one. It is to further the encouraged development in the sector that we're talking about in the schedule to this resolution. I wish to signal a great appreciation and debt of gratitude and thanks to the Honourable Minister of Finance in particular for taking very bold steps to shore up the economy. And I wish to recommend that this motion be carried forthwith after the Honourable Member wraps up.
Minister of Trade and Industry.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, it's not for this place at this time and within this motion to give any full detail on the energy sector. I mean, this is not a full-blown energy debate as you would like, as the other side would like to have it. Again, this is simply about the continuation of exemptions to the benefit of the offshore petroleum exploration and production operations sector. What I will do is just to inform the Honourable House that the level of exemptions granted for the period January 1st, 2016 to July 31st, 2017 amounts to just over 20 million TT dollars. And the exemptions were granted to 6 companies, and these 6 companies are Petrotrin, Shell Trinidad Limited, who has now come back into Trinidad and Tobago, Perenco, BP Trinidad and Tobago, EOG Resources Trinidad Limited, and the National Gas Company of Trinidad and Tobago Limited for raw materials and for equipment. Let me just correct the statement that the energy sector is falling apart just by saying, and not going into any detail at all, that the sector indeed faces a very positive and fruitful outlook under this government, and based on a number of new gas projects that are already taking place and which will continue into the medium term, into the short and medium term. Madam Speaker, this government commends that this motion be passed in this Honourable House of Representatives to allow the Minister of Trade and Industry to continue to grant exemptions from customs duties to the offshore petroleum exploration and production operations sector. I beg to move.
Honourable members, the question is, be it resolved that the House of Representatives, in accordance with and subject to the provisions of Section 56 of the Customs Act, exempt from import duties of customs, the class of goods specified in the first column of the schedule, being goods imported or entered for use for the purposes specified in the third column, but that this resolution shall cease to have effect in respect of any class of goods specified in the first column that is manufactured in Trinidad and Tobago. Schedule, first column, class of goods, equipment, materials and supplies. Second column, purposes for which goods are to be used, imported for use in offshore petroleum, exploration and petroleum operations. Third column, period of exemption from 1st January 2018 to 31st December 2020. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? I think the ayes have it. Members, it is now 4:27:21. I think it's an appropriate time to take the suspension. I now hereby, this House is now suspended to 5 p.m.